Chapter 746. Kill. It was obvious that the flaming man behind him had the bloodline of the fire phoenix. He was about 10 feet tall, and his face was blurred, but one could roughly see a sharp phoenix beak on his face. His body was almost completely transparent, like a red-hot glass, and a large sheet of clean, gentle flame was spraying out of his body. It was this seemingly harmless flame that, on the contrary, looked extraordinarily beautiful, but had burned through the star power barrier in Wuxia's formation. The heavenly flame of Phoenix was the only superior grade divine flame between heaven and earth that had evolved from acquired to innate. It had to be devoured by the imperial bloodline of the Phoenix clan with excellent aptitudes, then fuse with a wisp of innate fire spirit in the bloodline of the Phoenix, transforming all acquired flames into the invincible heavenly flame of Phoenix that could incinerate everything. It was also a flame that had a life of its own, and could create things. The blade in the flaming man's hand was produced out of thin air by the heavenly flame of Phoenix. It was not an illusory object, but a divine weapon forged from the divine iron of Phoenix condensed from the heavenly flame of Phoenix. This was the mystery of the heavenly flame of Phoenix. Ordinary phoenixes could only use the Naming flame, which was one of the most powerful flames in the world. Only the imperial bloodline of the Phoenix clan could produce the heavenly flame of Phoenix. It was also one of the most mysterious flames in the world, and the Phoenix clan rarely showed it to the public. Wuxia's heart sank. Among these divine beasts who claimed that their children had died in the myriad poisons formation, there was actually an imperial bloodline of the Phoenix clan? This was a big problem. It was Wuxia who constructed the myriad poisons formation, and if he attracted the attention of the Phoenix clan, he would be in endless trouble. The Phoenix clan was the emperor of all the birds in the world. Even though divine birds such as Gale and Blue Luan sometimes did not obey the orders of the Phoenix clan, no one dared to underestimate the strength of the Phoenix clan. Although the current Phoenix clan was no longer as mighty and powerful as it was in the ancient times, and there were internal divisions in the Phoenix clan, such as the 5 great emperors on Pangu continent, and the Dayu dynasty, the identity of this flaming man was enough to give Wuxia a headache. Even 1/6 of the overall strength of the Phoenix clan was not something that Wuxia could withstand. Damn it! Why don't you take care of your son, and let him run around? It's the father's fault for not teaching his son properly. Your son deserves to die. A stream of anger rushed straight to his head. From the dragon scales all over Wuxia's body, a clump of black flame that was as tranquil as melted glass spurted out. The sky-burning divine flame roared out, burning a large hole in the void behind him. The fire phoenix screeched and slashed its blade into the void behind Wuxia. He couldn't stop it in time and tumbled into the shattered void. Wuxia clasped his palms together, and a murderous look flashed across his face. In the next moment, a large amount of lightning flame condensed from chaotic energy smashed into the shattered void along with a deep, muffled whistle. Behind him, countless translucent white spherical bulges appeared in the 30 feet wide void. This was a phenomenon that could only be seen when the void barrier was shattered by his chaos divine thunder. Baizhu and his wife stared with their eyes wide open. "How dare you kill Lord Fengheng?" they roared in unison. Wuxia stamped his foot on Baizhu's head and roared, "You can kill me, but don't tell me I can't kill you?" With a casual wave of his hand, a beam of sky-burning divine flame transformed into a tiny blade shadow and cut through the void. Lord Fengheng howled and fell out of the void. His whole body was covered with twisted wounds. Obviously, the shattering of the void had caused him great harm. After all, although Lord Fengheng's bloodline was noble, his cultivation base was too low. A mere 12th-tier gold immortal was undoubtedly vulnerable to a single blow from Wuxia. Grabbing Lord Fengheng's head with one hand, Wuxia crushed it. A clump of black fiend flame rushed out of his palm, which quickly refined Lord Fengheng's body, burned his soul, and turned him into numerous golden blood crystals and purple soul crystals. Wuxia took a deep breath and absorbed the phoenix bloodline extracted from Lord Fengheng's body, which was several miles long and as thick as a water tank. It was the bloodline of the Phoenix imperial family. With a gentle breath, he inhaled the heavenly fire of Phoenix, which was trembling slightly where Lord Fengheng had disappeared. This was the real heavenly fire of Phoenix. There was no need for Wuxia to collect all kinds of acquired flames. Now he already had the purest heavenly fire of Phoenix. In Baiju's horrified eyes, Wuqi put his fingers together, and a sharp sword forged from the divine iron of Phoenix, which was transformed from the heavenly fire of Phoenix, was pressed against Baiju's forehead. Release your soul and let me imprison you. Or you die, and I'll leave your wife to Ao Buzin. When Ao Buzin heard Wuqi's words, saliva splashed out of the corner of his mouth. He cried out joyfully, "My lord has unified the universe, and his longevity is boundless. Kill that man, and after Lao Tzu has taught this woman a few days, I promise she will be obedient. She won't dare to go east, and she won't dare to kill a chicken. Wonderful, my beauty, here comes Lao Tzu. There was a time when Lao Tzu liked men like you." Baiju and his wife roared angrily at the same time. Wuqi pointed the sword at Baiju. The high temperature of the heavenly fire of Phoenix burned Baiju's fur, and the sword sank between his eyebrows and pressed against his skull. "I don't know why your son appeared in the myriad poisons formation, and I'm not here for him," Wuqi cried out in a deep voice. "To put it bluntly, if a son dies he can have another one, but if you die, you will really have no descendants. Release your soul and let me imprison you, or else. Ao Buzin, can dragons and white tigers give birth to mixed bloods?" Ao Buzin laughed strangely and cried out, "Generally speaking, it's impossible for a man to have sex once in a while. But Lao Tzu can have sex once in a while. At worst, Lao Tzu can have sex every night for a whole cultivation period. Surely he can lay a few white tiger eggs, can't he? TSK, my beauty, as the saying goes, love grows with time. Why don't you just give in to me, Lao Tzu? Your husband will soon be a dead tiger, and Lao Tzu can soak his penis in wine." White tiger eggs. The faces of Baiju and his wife darkened. It was well known that white tigers were viviparous, and only dragons were oviparous divine beasts. If a white tiger laid eggs, wouldn't it be the kind of crystal that Ao Buzin mentioned? As for soaking a certain part of Baiju's body in wine, Baiju's body began to tremble, and he felt a chill between his hind legs. "You can always have another son when your son is gone," Wuqi said grimly as he slowly thrust the sword into Baiju's skull. Baiju roared angrily, "I surrender. Lao Tzu surrenders. You'd better think it through. Lao Tzu is White Emperor's man." Ao Buzin, who had been arrogant and energetic just a moment ago, immediately lost his strength. He flew back to Wuqi's shoulder weakly, threw his head back, and heaved a long sigh. "You're so disappointing. Don't you know that a man would rather die than submit? Baiju, you still have a chance. You still have a chance to be a hero. Come on, you'd rather die than submit. You'll just be killed by my master, and then I'll take your wife, right?" As he spoke, Ao Buzin's interest was aroused again. He stood on Wuqi's shoulder with his two hind paws, waved his hands and roared passionately, "Come on, Baiju. Don't bring shame to the ancestors of your White Tiger clan. Die like a hero. You'd rather die standing than live on your knees." Wuqi cast a sidelong glance at Ao Buzin and snorted coldly. Baiju and his wife looked at each other, their bodies trembling. Obviously, they were also struggling in their hearts. Wuqi sneered and said coldly, "Oh, you'd rather die standing than live on your knees? Ao Buzin, you've taken Baiju's wife. Are you going to make her kneel or stand?" Ao Buzin's saliva flowed down from the corner of his mouth again. He narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Of course she's going to lie on her knees." Baiju and his wife were so angry that they spat out a mouthful of blood. Baiju gnashed his teeth and roared, Lao Tzu, I surrender." He knocked his head hard on the ground, and a beam of white light shot out from between his eyebrows. The soul of a white tiger was running wildly in the white light. Wuqi snorted coldly, and a thin mark appeared between his eyebrows. A drop of his blood essence flew out and planted the most complicated and vicious restriction he knew in Baiju's primordial spirit. Then Wuqi did the same to Baiju's wife by air. The couple were forced to obey Wuqi. They looked at each other for a while, then couldn't help but burst into tears. But Lord Fengheng was brutally killed by Wuqi right in front of them, and the tragic scene really frightened them. Coupled with Wuqi's vicious and shameless threat, Baiju and Bai'er did not have the courage to disobey Wuqi's order. As the proud descendants of the White Tiger, they had no choice but to surrender. The formation began to tremble violently. The divine beasts were still attacking Wuqi's formation with all their might. Another stream of blood gushed out of Wuqi's 7 orifices. He gritted his teeth and shouted, then hurriedly took Bai Zhu and Bai Er to another fire phoenix in the formation, which was Lord Feng Heng's wife. With the help of Bai Zhu and Bai Er, Wuqi effortlessly used Bai Zhu and Bai Er to launch a sneak attack from behind, while he himself killed the phoenix head-on. As for Ao Buzan's request to keep the fire phoenix to warm his bed, Wuqi chose to ignore it. Ao Buzan looked bitterly at Wuqi, but when Wuqi threw her all the blood and soul crystals extracted from the fire phoenix, Ao Buzan immediately rose to her feet in high spirits and began to flatter Wuqi. Bai Zhu and Bai Er launched a sneak attack, while Wuqi launched a frontal attack. One by one, Wuqi subdued the remaining 42 divine beasts in the formation. But he still planted a vicious restrictive spell in their nascent divinity, forcing these divine beasts, who all had the cultivation base of gold immortals, to submit to him. Together with the Star Golden Rhino couple who were trapped in Dark Ean's celestial tower, Wuqi now had 46 powerful divine beasts under his command, all of whom had the cultivation base of gold immortals or above. Looking at these powerful divine beasts complacently, Wuqi put them all into Dark Ean's celestial tower. Then with a wave of his hand he dispelled the celestial formation. The formation formed by 60 flying ships under Huang Liang's command gradually revealed itself amidst the starlight. More than 1,000 miles away, Liu Bang, who was enjoying a feast on a mountaintop, jumped to his feet in shock. That kid killed Bai Zhu and the others? How did he do it? Could it be that he's already a supreme high priest? King Zhangqiu, who was lying on the bodies of a few female immortals, jumped to his feet as well. Chapter 747. When Huang Liang and the 10,000 soldiers that Wuqi had brought out of the East Sea province saw the blue sky and white clouds again, all of them breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Wuqi hovered in front of these flying ships. Dark Ean's celestial tower was emitting beams of starlight that wrapped around Wuqi, making him look like a deity made of starlight, radiating a light so bright that no one dared to look directly at him. At this moment, Huang Liang and the others really thought that Wuqi was the reincarnation of some ancient god. They could not believe that he alone had killed dozens of divine beasts blocking their way, and even the hundreds of powerful spirit beasts they had brought with them were gone. Marquis of Province. Huang Liang drew his sword, pointed it at the sky, and cried out. One after another, the 10,000 soldiers drew their weapons and let out a deafening roar. Everyone looked at Wuqi solemnly. From this moment on, Wuqi's place in their hearts would be unshakable. Wuqi took a deep breath. His eyes shone with a strange gleam, and in the blink of an eye, he glanced at all the mountains and hills within a radius of 10,000 miles. Under the gaze of his eyes, nothing could hide. In just the blink of an eye, he had fixed his eyes on Liu Bang and the others, who were standing on a mountaintop 1,000 miles away and staring at him with their mouths agape. Wuqi smiled a very happy smile. No wonder these aggressive divine beasts could accurately block his way, and no wonder they could get such accurate information. With King Zhangqiu and Liu Bang by his side, Wuqi was too lazy to think about anything else. King Zhangqiu, you have colluded with immortals and plotted against the Marquis of Diyu Province. You deserve to die. Come with me to Liangzhu now and confess your crimes. Wuqi let out a deafening roar. A clump of 9 nether ghost flame towered into the sky from behind him, transforming into a giant hand that was a few miles in circumference. In a flash, it streaked across the sky and grabbed at Liu Bang and the others. With Wuqi's current cultivation base, he did not care about the strength of Liu Bang and the others at all. He was confident that he could easily capture them alive and interrogate them for some extremely confidential information. The fact that Liu Bang and King Zhangqiu were sitting opposite each other and having a feast was strange no matter how one looked at it. And the mystery behind it was very valuable. Wuqi also saw the flagpole standing between Liu Bang and King Zhangqiu. He also saw the flag emitting a faint black smoke that blanketed an area 3,000 miles in circumference. Without a doubt, the delay of the garrison in Yuxiong Plain must have something to do with this flag. Beside Wuqi, the dragon python sisters had also transformed into giant creatures that were a few miles long. Lightly flapping their translucent wings, they opened their mouths and shot out 2 beams of divine light. one gold and the other silver. The beams intertwined with each other and turned into two spiral-shaped beams of light that shot toward the mountaintop. At the same time, Wuxia waved his hand and sent all the flying ships behind him into his chaotic interstitial world, except for the Jade Armor Dark Turtle flying ship with the strongest defense. He sent all the soldiers in the ships to the last one, the Jade Armor Dark Turtle flying ship, while the Dark Een Celestial Tower burst out a great sheet of starlight to envelop the flying ship as well. A few fiend shadows darted out from under Wuxia's feet and plunged silently into the ground without alerting anyone, concealing all their auras and hiding in the depths of the earth. Even before the fight with Lu Bang and the others began, Wuxia was fully prepared. He did not know the origin of the huge flagpole and the flag, but he had a bad feeling about it. For the sake of safety, he had to be prepared to deal with any changes. Huang Liang and the other captains and soldiers were part of Wuxia's foundation, and he could not let them die in vain. Therefore he had to protect them well. As for the few celestial fiend puppets, they would be able to send some messages to Princess Zhongli should Wuxia encounter some irresistible force and be trapped. Wuxia was confident that even if he was really trapped by some formation used by Lu Bang and others, as long as Princess Zhongli was in charge of the situation, she would not let the East Sea province fall into chaos, and would find a way to help him as much as possible. The giant hand formed from the 9 nether ghost flame was the first to arrive, but the divine light of ice and fire unleashed by the dragon python sisters was less than 10 miles away from the mountaintop. Lu Bang smiled contemptuously. He patted the thigh of the female immortal next to him, then pointed at the sky-veiling flag of chaos. Smiling, he said to King Zhangqiu, "Those livestock are killed, and Tan Lang, the Marquis of East Sea Province who is highly appreciated by the human emperor, is missing as well. Do you think there is a better result than this, Your Highness? Those livestock are the true descendants of the 3 old fogies in the east, north, and west." Smiling, King Zhangqiu spread the legs of a petite female immortal and placed them on his body. While enjoying the beautiful body of the female immortal, he burst out laughing and said, "It couldn't be better. The current human emperor is indecisive, but also headstrong. Now that the genius he admires the most has suddenly gone missing, he can't just swallow his anger. When the time comes, as long as we add fuel to the fire, he will have no choice but to fall into our trap." Lu Bang and King Zhangqiu were laughing complacently, but they did not know that not only could Wuxia see every slightest movement of their lips from thousands of miles away, but Wuxia was also proficient in lip reading. Wuxia had captured every word of their conversation. Wuxia could not help but wonder, what kind of plan do they have? How could they trap the Eastern Green Emperor, the Northern Black Emperor, and the Western White Emperor, 3 figures who had existed since the ancient times, and the current human emperor? What means does Lu Bang have to make me go missing? Just as Wuxia was wondering, high up in the sky, beyond the green underworld, a huge star suddenly burst out with a dazzling light. Then another star burst out with a dazzling light that lit up the whole sky. And then more and more stars burst out with blinding flames. A total of 7 stars hung high up in the sky, forming the pattern of a spoon that Wuxia was very familiar with, stealing the light from all the other stars. But as soon as the light of these 7 stars shone in the direction right in front of the handle of the spoon, a large star that was hundreds of times brighter than all 7 stars combined burst out with a bright light that blanketed the whole sky. A total of 8 beams of silver light came whistling down from the sky, and were swallowed by the sky-veiling flag of chaos. The originally pitch-black flagpole and the flag were covered with a dazzling silver light at the same time, and the star patterns of the Big Dipper and the North Star quietly appeared on the flag. The divine light of ice and fire shot out by the dragon python sisters was gently swept up by the flag and disappeared. But just as the giant hand condensed from the 9 nether ghost flame flew over the mountaintop, the flag swayed slightly, and a silver torrent soared into the sky, rolling up the pitch-black hand and disappearing without a trace. Before Wuxia could do anything else, Lu Bang gently flicked his finger. Immediately, a strong beam of light 10 miles in diameter shot out from the sky-veiling flag of chaos, falling beside Wuxia and the others in an instant. A loud boom rang out as the void within a radius of several hundred miles around Wuxia and the others collapsed. Wuxia and everything around him were sucked into the collapsing void. Along with them were dozens of mountains of different sizes and vast tracts of land. Fortunately, after Wuxi's celestial fiend puppets plunged into the ground, they quickly went far away along with the flow of natural energy in the underground energy veins. Otherwise, they would have been sucked into the void as well. And at that time, there would be no one to inform them. With the strike of the sky-veiling flag of chaos, Wuxi and the others were sucked into the void. The silver light swirled around the shattered void for a while, and in the blink of an eye, it had completely mended the broken void. Lu Bang chuckled and waved his hand. The sky-veiling flag of chaos transformed into a small flag and fell into his hand. Then he sprinkled a sheet of silver light that swept up everything on the mountaintop, including the dismembered flood dragon and deer immortal, leaving not even a hair behind. Then, the company quickly disappeared amidst the silver light. Right after Lu Bang and the others disappeared, the 18 Supreme Towers soundlessly broke through the void and arrived above the mountaintop. A cold, emotionless voice rang out. "Which fellow immortal from the celestial court is here? Stay here. Is this a place where you can come and go as you please?" Accompanied by the gloomy voice, an invisible, bizarre force quietly rang out along with the shrill howl of ghosts. The mountain where Lu Bang and the others had been standing just now turned into ashes and dissipated silently. Then the mountains and rivers within a radius of 1,000 miles, including several small villages, disintegrated as well. Except for those farmers who were at a loss, everything else, including their clothes, was annihilated by the bizarre force. The joint attack of the 18 Supreme Oracles shook Lu Bang and the others, who had been swept away by the sky-veiling flag of chaos, and blood sprayed out from all over their bodies at the same time. Some people with weaker cultivation bases, such as the few female immortals around Lu Bang, as well as the maids and cooks they brought with them, exploded and turned into blood that sprayed all over the sky. Fortunately, the sky-veiling flag of chaos was extremely mysterious. Although it was controlled by Lu Bang and could not exert any of its power, it still brought Lu Bang, King Zhangqiu, and the others into the void and fled without being discovered by these supreme oracles who had sensed something was amiss. In just 10 minutes, the news that Tan Lang, the Marquis of East Sea Province, had been attacked and his whereabouts were unknown quickly spread across Liangzhu. At this moment, Wuqi was standing in the main control cabin of a jade-armored dark turtle flying ship, his hands clasped tightly around a huge crystal that stood hundreds of feet tall in front of him, constantly injecting all his strength into it. The huge jade-armored dark turtle flying ship was wrapped in a layer of light that looked like a turtle shell, and was flying through the dark, unknown turbulence of space like a straw. Inside the cabin, Huang Liang and the other 10,000 soldiers were unconscious. They were knocked out by the impact when the void was broken, and if it were not for the ship's protection, they would have been crushed into meat pies by the pressure brought by the swift and violent turbulence of space outside. The chaotic energy in Wu Qi's body was rapidly depleting, and just as his strength was about to be depleted, the huge flying ship trembled violently and plunged headlong through a thick, dark barrier that stretched for billions of miles, plunging into a strange world where hundreds of blood-red moons hung in the dark sky. Wave after wave of gloomy and evil aura kept coming from all directions. The flying ship dispersed the evil aura, stirred up large ripples, and crashed heavily into the middle of a huge mountain that stood tens of thousands of miles tall, sinking deep into the dark mountain. Wu Qi took a deep breath and gasped violently for a few moments. Damn it, where have I been taken? Chapter 748. The violent impact did not leave a scratch on the shell of the ship. The shell of this prehistoric beast did not disappoint. On the contrary, the decks and cabins constructed by the military court were twisted, and some of the energy transmission arrays were damaged. A large amount of energy was flowing out of these damaged arrays, while the turtle shell-shaped light screen on the ship's surface was gradually fading away. Wu Qi cursed under his breath, swaying and shaking his dizzy head. Then he trod on the wrinkled and uneven deck, and came before the energy core. Then he threw a punch at the thick alloy armor outside the energy core, sinking Wu Qi's fist deep into the hard armor, which was mainly composed of the raw materials used to forge heaven immortal artifacts. Accompanied by a shrill tearing noise, the 10 feet thick armor was torn apart by Wu Qi, revealing the twisted energy core, which was undergoing a violent reaction. 360 floating rune arrays were colliding with each other in the energy core, which was 3 miles in diameter. Normally, these rune arrays would hover in a fixed position inside the energy core instead of colliding with each other randomly like this. When the arrays collided with each other, a blinding light burst out. When the light, which contained the power of runes, fell onto a pile of immortal stones and spirit stones floating in the center of the energy core, it immediately stirred up a huge amount of energy that flowed like water. Wuxia sucked in a cold breath. The damnable impact had destroyed the network of formations that were used to send out the energies, and prevented the energies from flowing out freely in the energy cores, causing them to accumulate in this place. If he had not come here immediately after the collision, it would not have taken long for this energy core, which was piled up like a small hill about a mile in diameter, to explode. Of course, the outer turtle shell would not be damaged by such an explosion, but Huang Liang and the others inside the cabin would be dead for sure. Cursing under his breath, Wuxia waved his hand and stored the pile of immortal stones and energy stones, which were constantly releasing a tremendous power, into his interstitial world. He opened his mouth and took a deep breath, sucking in all the enormous energy that had been released. It was roughly equal to all the immortal energy in the body of 300 ordinary heaven immortals. But for Wuxia, who was already a 5th-tier gold immortal, it was only enough to replenish a little of the energy he had just lost. Then he exercised a mental cultivation technique, and transformed the energy he absorbed into chaotic energy, then strode out of the control cabin. On the first floor near the bridge, Huang Liang and the other soldiers were lying on the ground. Wuxia frowned and patted Ao Buzin on the head. Ao Buzin let out a weird laugh, opened his mouth, and spurted out a stinky black water wave. As the black water swept past, Huang Liang and the others screamed and jumped to their feet as they kept coughing out stinky black water. Wuxia gave a soft cry, and the soldiers stopped what they were doing. Although all the immortal stones and energy stones in the energy cores had been taken away by Wuxia, and the cabin had become dark and gloomy, with the help of the pearls mounted on the sabers carried by Huang Liang and the other officers, the cabin was illuminated with a faint light, and the people could still see everything around them. Huang Liang cleared his throat, then carefully came up to Wuxia and asked respectfully, "What happened, Marquis?" Wuxia shook his head and said with a frown, "We were ambushed just now. Someone used a magical treasure to tear open the void and throw us into this damned place. I was afraid that you couldn't protect the flying ship, so I rushed into the ship and took control of it. I don't know where it is now." Stamping his foot, Wuxia said in a deep voice, "Don't worry about it. Everyone, get out of here. This flying ship is damaged, and it can't be used without major repairs. Get out and change flying ships, then find out where we are, and find a way to leave this place." Huang Liang wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Instead, he gave a loud shout and ordered the soldiers to line up and leave the cabin. Wuxia was the last to go out. He put away the damaged flying ship. Leading the army, he walked along a 100-mile-long tunnel that the flying ship had created on the mountain. After walking for a while, a strong gust of wind suddenly blew in front of them. Under the blood-red moonlight, a wild continent appeared in front of them. They were standing at the entrance of a huge cave, which was naturally the result of the flying ship's collision just now. Looking up, they saw a black mountain towering into the clouds. And looking down, they saw an abyss that was tens of thousands of miles deep. All the soldiers present, including Huang Liang and the other captains, could only see hundreds of blood-red moons of different sizes in the sky, and the dark mist and dark clouds in the surroundings. Apart from that, they could not see anything else. But in Wuqi's eyes he could see a lot more. With a casual glance, he could see a grain of sand hundreds of thousands of miles away. Even though the sky was filled with hazy dark mist and thick dark clouds, it could not obstruct his vision. The mountain they were on was smooth and smooth, like a glaze that had been smeared with oil. It was a very strange stone, as if it had been washed by some invisible energy. It was so smooth that it could be used as a mirror. Wuxia sent his divine sense into the mountain. These black stones were a great obstacle to divine sense. Even with Wuqi's overall strength, his divine sense could only penetrate less than 1 mile into the mountain. The mountain was part of a huge mountain range. Wuxia spread his divine will in all directions, and he found that behind them was a huge mountain range that stretched for an unknown number of miles. At least, with the current strength of Wuxia's divine sense, he could not completely cover this mountain range. In front of the crowd, as far as Wuxia could see, was a black desert. Dark hills, dark deserts, and dark deserts. Occasionally, a few dark yellow rivers would flow quietly through them. Along the banks of these rivers, the carcasses of countless monsters who had died tragically could be seen lying in disorder. These monsters came in all shapes and sizes. Not only on Panga continent, there was no record of them even in the universal strange objects found in Scroll of Stealing. Not far away from the foot of the mountain, a few monsters that looked like ferocious wolves but had huge bodies, about 300 feet long and covered with sharp bone spikes, were attacking a huge monster that measured about 4,000 feet long, looked like a giant caterpillar, and was also covered with a thick black shell. The monster was wriggling its body and moving forward at a high speed. The monsters kept running around it, reaching out their claws and tearing at its body from time to time. Occasionally, when one of the claws ripped open the monster's shell, a large amount of black blood would spray out. The blood was extremely corrosive. Wuxia saw a few huge rocks that were hit by the blood emit thick white smoke, and in the blink of an eye, they were corroded into puddles of liquid. The giant beast was in pain. A row of strange patterns that looked like human eyes grew on the middle of its body. Every time its carapace was torn open, a few of the patterns would spew out a large amount of poisonous gas, spreading in all directions. The few monsters seemed to know how dangerous the poisonous smoke was. Every time it sprayed out, they would nimbly dodge to the side, avoiding a head-on confrontation with the monster. Wuxia could not help but shake his head as he glanced at these huge creatures with his divine will. Although their bodies were huge, their cultivation bases were very low, not even reaching the realm of Jin Dan. They were just some ordinary wild beasts, not even demon beasts. However, their physical strength was not weak, probably comparable to a nascent soul cultivator who specialized in body tempering. Just a casual attack from the few monsters that looked like ferocious wolves could carry a force of several 100,000 kilograms. What a damned place! Wuxia cursed under his breath. There was not the slightest natural energy in the air here, only a gloomy and evil air that seemed to carry a strange life force, but it was very different from the life forces that Wuxia was familiar with. Apart from the hundreds of blood-red moons, there was nothing else in the sky, and there was no earth veins or natural energy beneath the ground. There were only pitch-black crypts that rolled and churned with a gloomy and evil aura scattered in all directions. After a brief moment of pondering, Wuxia waved his hand and shot out a ball of black flame, from which flew out an undamaged jade-armored dark turtle flying ship, and hovered in front of everyone. "Huangliang," said Wuxia in a deep voice, "all soldiers, board the ship at once and distribute the powerful weapons gifted by King Yufeng to everyone. Be on high alert at all times. God knows what kind of place this is. We need to find a way to leave this place." Huang Liang answered, and all the soldiers quickly boarded the ship. A large number of weapons gifted by Gao were stored in the ship's storeroom, including all kinds of powerful bone talismans and bows, as well as tens of thousands of sets of heavy armors with amazing defensive power. Meanwhile, Wuxia ordered all the soldiers to change into the heavy armors that Gao had obtained through private channels. Originally, only the imperial guards of Liangzhu were entitled to issue them. The heavy armors calmed the soldiers' hearts. At least, their safety was greatly guaranteed. No matter what kind of damned place this was, with the protection of the jade armor dark turtle flying ship, the powerful armors that only the imperial guards of Du could issue to them, and all kinds of powerful bows, bone talismans, and other weapons, what kind of situation could they not handle? After closing all the cabin doors of the flying ship, leaving only a few windows for looking out, Wuxia stood on the bridge and gave the order to set off. The flying ship flew very cautiously, almost sticking close to the ground, until it was only less than a mile above the ground. In such a strange place, Wuxia would rather let the soldiers deal with the dangers from the ground than fight the enemies in the sky. After all, not many of the 10,000 soldiers had the strength to fly in the sky, and fighting the enemies in the sky would undoubtedly be the most dangerous. After flying for a day and a night, When they were about 100 miles away from the nearest Yellow River, Wuxia finally knew where this place was. A few giant heavenly ghosts that Wuxia had met in the capital city of Yen Kingdom on Myriad Immortals planet were jumping and running from a distance. They were chasing after a giant monster that was fleeing in panic, as if they were hunting for food. Damn it, they sent us to the ghost realm. Wuxia's face turned extremely unsightly. Chapter 749. Under Wuxia's gaze, the few heavenly ghosts rushed to the giant beast they had hunted like a gust of wind. Their sharp claws, teeth, and tails left countless huge wounds on the beast's body. In just a few breaths of time, the giant beast, which was several miles long, had been devoured by the few heavenly ghosts, and a great deal of blood gushed out of its mouth. Before long, 2 heavenly ghosts crawled out of the beast's mouth. Obviously, they had destroyed the beast's internal organs and killed its vitality. Even Wuxia, who had a gloomy face, could not help but nod in admiration. These heavenly ghosts were much stronger than the one that had appeared in G City many years ago, and the gap in their strength was like the gap between a baby and an adult tiger. In terms of speed, strength, and ferocity, the few heavenly ghosts in front of him were far superior to the one Wuxia had seen in the past. Even the giant beast they hunted had the overall strength of a heaven immortal, but they were easily killed by them. A few heavenly ghosts squeezed out of the giant beast's body happily, threw their heads back and roared joyfully, then gave a surprised look at the jade armor dark turtle flying ship, which was hovering in the sky dozens of miles away. Then, they waved their claws disapprovingly and leaped happily onto the giant beast's body. After devouring the beast's flesh and blood, the few heavenly ghosts cooperated with each other and dragged the nearly 3 miles long giant beast into the distance. At Wuxia's order, the flying ship quietly followed behind the few heavenly ghosts. He even used his divine sense to gather a large patch of dark clouds in the distance and had them hover around the ship. Then he laid down all kinds of restrictive spells to prevent divine sense from peeping into the ship. For a moment, the huge dark clouds drifted behind the few heavenly ghosts, but they knew nothing about it as they dragged the giant beast upstream along a great river. The giant beast's heavy body left visible marks on the ground, and its blood flowed into the river in gurgling streams. The pungent smell of blood caused the creatures in the river to riot, and from time to time, large fish and aquatic beasts with heavy bony armor could be seen leaping out of the river. These big fish and aquatic beasts had ferocious faces and terrifying strength. Although they couldn't walk out of the water, they still leaped out of the water and madly roared at the few heavenly ghosts who were walking quickly on the shore. The few hundreds of meters long fishes widely opened their mouths. Their sharp teeth reflected the blood-red moonlight, shining brightly. They closed their mouths, and their teeth clashed against each other, causing a silvery cracking noise. A few large fishes even spat out light yellow streams of water from their bellies with all their might, darting for miles like sharp arrows and leaving huge holes on the dead beast's body. The few heavenly ghosts did not take these big fish and aquatic beasts seriously. They chattered and laughed, stopping from time to stand on the shore and twist their hips to provoke the creatures in the river. Wuxia could not help but be surprised. According to the legends of immortal cultivators, these heavenly ghosts in the ghost realm were ferocious by nature and had no intelligence. They acted entirely on instinct. But looking at the free and unrestrained appearance of these heavenly ghosts, they were no different from human naughty teenagers. Although they looked a little ferocious, they did things in an orderly manner, and did not give off the feeling that they had lost their spiritual wisdom, and were muddle-headed. Everyone in the world is like this. Wuxia shook his head inwardly. It was very likely that the ghost realm had caused great casualties to immortal cultivators in the past, so all the immortal cultivators were deliberately discrediting the existence of the ghost realm. Perhaps the heavenly ghosts in the ghost realm were indeed ferocious monsters who only knew how to kill, but perhaps there were also individuals with extremely high intelligence among them? At least, judging from the performance of these few heavenly ghosts, Wuxia hoped that the heavenly ghosts in the ghost realm were not the legendary monsters. He hoped that he could meet some intelligent and cultured heavenly ghosts, and perhaps they would be the hope for Wuxia to leave this place with his subordinates. He wondered if the East Sea City had received the news that he was missing. Princess Zhonglu must keep the situation under control, and she must not rashly avenge me. King Zhongqiu was the prince of Diyu, and he was supported by King Baishan. As for Liu Bang, that old rascal and old lecher, since they had colluded with each other to plot against Wu Qi, how could they let go of the East Sea province that was under Wu Qi's name? Perhaps they would find an excuse to go to the East Sea province and stir up trouble. If Liu Bang saw Princess Zhonglu and had that kind of idea, with a sinister laugh, Wu Qi gritted his teeth and said, "If you dare to touch even a hair of Lao Tzu's people, Lao Tzu will wipe out your whole family." The sudden surge of thoughts made Wu Qi's killing intent surge. Huang Liang and the others were startled by Wu Qi's sudden burst of cold air. They stood where they were and dared not to move, controlling the flying ship to fly forward with a straight face. No one dared to make a sound, lest they offend Wu Qi, who had suddenly lost his temper and taught him a lesson for no reason. Clenching his fists so tightly that they made cracking noises, Wu Qi strode up to the transparent crystal wall in front of the bridge. He lightly tapped the crystal wall with his fingertips. Immediately, numerous runes, dozens of triangles, squares, and other three-dimensional patterns emerged on the surface of the light blue crystal wall, which was about 10 feet thick like a puddle of clear water. A wisp of Wu Qi's divine sense was sent into the crystal wall. After being magnified and purified by the restrictive formation, it transformed into an invisible wave that swept across tens of thousands of miles in a flash, recording the topographic map of the area into a huge soul crystal inside the flying ship. This was the special feature of the flying ships of Diyu's military court. They could quickly scan and record the topography of unfamiliar areas. As long as dozens of flying ships were sent out, they could record the topography of a large area in a very short period of time for the army to march and fight. Now that Wu Qi and his subordinates had been dragged into the ghost realm, he had to make all kinds of preparations. He could not take care of the affairs in the East Sea province for the time being. The most important thing now was to bring Huang Liang and his subordinates back to Pangu continent safely. Huang Liang, pass down my orders to all the brothers. The place we are in now is the legendary Ghost Realm, a place where only death awaits. Let all the brothers remember that the man who dragged us into this realm is King Zhongqiu, the son of King Baishan of Diyu. He has colluded with the immortals of the celestial court, and has committed many shady deeds that have harmed Diyu. This time they have schemed against us, intending to kill us. All the men of East Sea will never let them go. As long as we can get out of the ghost realm, we will make him bleed for 5 steps, and he will give us an explanation. Wu Qi's voice was cold and murderous. It sounded like 2 pieces of metal colliding with each other, bringing with it a terrible aura of fighting on a battlefield. Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Huang Liang and the others could not help but have their hair stand on end. At the same time, a great rage rose from the bottom of their hearts. Who was King Zhongqiu? The Prince of Diyu. The Prince of Diyu had colluded with the immortals of the celestial court to plot against the Marquis of Diyu, and sent 10,000 soldiers who had made great contributions in the crusade against Myriad Immortal Alliance into the ghost realm. There was no need to say anything more. Huang Liang and the others strode out of the bridge, and told the 10,000 soldiers what Wu Qi had said. Before long, deafening roars began to reverberate and collide violently in the jade-armored dark turtle flying ship. All the soldiers were roaring. 5 steps of blood, an eye for an eye. Wu Qi snorted coldly. Now that he was out of the ghost realm, there were some things that he had to do quickly and decisively. Otherwise, would the people in the world still think he was a pushover? They had come to him again and again. Could it be that he, Wu Qi, was not allowed to wield his blade and kill people? After obtaining the cultivation base of a 5th-tier gold immortal, and subduing a group of gold immortals such as Bai Zhu and Bai Er, Wu Qi was emboldened, and his desire to compromise and struggle for survival gradually faded away. The flying ship flew slowly forward. Several heavenly ghosts happily dragged the huge monster forward. After running for more than 10 hours, they finally came to a valley surrounded by several mountains in the upper reaches of the river. Standing on the bridge and looking into the distance, Wu Qi could not help but be overjoyed. There were crude buildings made of boulders in the valley. Although they looked crooked like a dog's kennel, they were indeed buildings. Since these heavenly ghosts could build buildings, it was obvious that they had a certain level of intelligence. And Wuqi also saw a large pit on one side of the valley, in which many pale black bones were piled up. These heavenly ghosts had learned to store the bones of their prey together, so the valley was clean and there were no messy bones scattered around. This awareness of environmental sanitation was also a sign of their intelligence. Wrapped in thick dark clouds, the flying ship slowly flew over the valley and hovered a few miles above the ground. The sky above the valley was already filled with dark clouds and black smoke, but even with the addition of the dark clouds brought by Wuqi, it did not look strange at all. When the few heavenly ghosts were still a few miles away from the narrow passage at the entrance of the valley, they let out a shrill howl. Immediately, dozens of small and seemingly youthful heavenly ghosts rushed out of the valley, chirping and leaping toward the few heavenly ghosts. With the efforts of dozens of heavenly ghosts, the huge monster was soon transported into the valley. From the crooked and dilapidated buildings, a group of trembling heavenly ghosts with missing arms, legs, and tails walked out. They grunted with joy and slowly walked to the square in the middle of the valley to help cut the monster into pieces. When Wuqi's divine sense swept across the valley, which was about 100 miles long and wide, he could not help but widen his eyes in surprise. Apart from the few heavenly ghosts who were out hunting and could be considered young men, there were only dozens of small heavenly ghosts in the valley, who could be considered teenagers and children. As for those heavenly ghosts with missing arms and legs, there were about 100 of them, but they were absolutely not young men. This was not the population ratio that a normal race should have. A few strong young men, dozens of children, and a large group of old men? Wuqi furrowed his brows. What was going on? Just as Wuqi was frowning and thinking, a shrill and unpleasant ghost howl suddenly came from afar. Wuqi hurriedly swept his divine sense in that direction, and saw that about 100 miles away, about 300 strong heavenly ghosts covered in green blood were being chased by more than 1,000 fierce and ferocious heavenly ghosts all the way to the valley. When the heavenly ghosts in the valley heard the howl, all of them rushed to the end of the narrow passage at the entrance of the valley, and assumed a defensive posture. From time to time, they let out shrill howls, echoing the sounds of the heavenly ghosts in the distance. It took only a few breaths of time for these heavenly ghosts to cover a distance of over 100 miles. Before long, the 300 or so heavenly ghosts had rushed into the valley. As soon as they entered, they turned around and joined the other heavenly ghosts in defending the narrow passage to the death. As they approached the valley, the 1,000-odd heavenly ghosts slowed down. Grinning grimly, they pressed toward the valley step by step. Chapter 750. After instructing Huang Liang and the others to wait in the flying boat, Wuqi flashed out of the boat. Casually, he pulled out a dark cloud and coiled it around his body, then began to descend slowly. Slowly, he came to a height of less than 1 mile from the ground, nearly touching the mountains on both sides of the valley's exit. As soon as he approached the top of the mountain, Wuqi's body swayed, and he was nearly sucked into the top of the mountain. Although the pitch-black mountains surrounding the valley were not very tall, they came with a strange suction force, and even with Wuqi's overall strength, he nearly made a fool out of himself. He roughly estimated the strength of the suction force, and concluded that these heavenly ghosts in front of him could not pass through the mountain safely. If they dared to enter or leave the valley from the top of the mountain, they would be firmly sucked to the top of the mountain and unable to move. Worse still, their bodies might not be able to withstand the great suction force, and their internal organs would be crushed to a pulp. Only then did Wuqi understand why the heavenly ghosts in the valley were only guarding the narrow passage, which was less than 100 feet wide, and why the heavenly ghosts outside the mountain were only baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at the other end of the passage. None of them dared to take a detour into the valley and attack the enemy from the back. Wuqi carefully studied the two groups of heavenly ghosts inside and outside the valley. The body lines of the group in the valley were softer, and the bone spurs on their backs were more exquisite and sharp, like polished jade. These heavenly ghosts in the valley gave off a strange sense of beauty. Their eyes were more lively, and there were sparks of wisdom flashing in them. They were stationed on one side of the narrow passage, and Chi-Chi could see the embryonic form of a military formation. However, the group of more than 1,000 heavenly ghosts outside the valley had bodies that looked like lumps of stone that had just been mined from the mountains. Their bodies were in a mess, and their muscles and bones were twisted together in a strange way. The bone spurs on their bodies were rough, and some of them seemed to have just been broken and had not yet regrown. The eyes of these heavenly ghosts were cloudy and filled with the brutal and ferocious aura of wild beasts. Their mouths were constantly dripping water, and from time to time, they let out deep and meaningless roars. These heavenly ghosts were running back and forth outside the narrow passage, trying to rush into the valley, but they seemed to be afraid of something. Their messy formation made them look like a group of wild beasts, and they could not be compared to the heavenly ghosts in the valley. After a moment of hesitation, over 100 heavenly ghosts threw their heads back and let out long roars, then rushed into the narrow passage that was tens of miles long like a gust of wind. They ran as fast as they could, and some of them even ran on the mountain walls that were perpendicular to the ground. They spat saliva and let out muffled roars, their eyes glinting with blood-red light as they pounced on the heavenly ghosts in the valley. The widest part of the narrow passage was only about 200 feet, and these heavenly ghosts were so huge that even at the widest part, they could only line up 4 or 5 heavenly ghosts shoulder to shoulder. It was even more difficult for these heavenly ghosts to maintain their formation when they were running at high speed. By the time they reached the middle of the passage, the invading heavenly ghosts could only run forward one after another, no longer having the momentum of a group charge. The heavenly ghosts in the valley let out deep roars, and when the first enemy rushed out of the passage, more than a dozen heavenly ghosts pounced on him at the same time. Tacitly, they launched a fierce attack on the enemy who had rushed out of the passage, slashing at the enemy with dozens of sharp claws and powerful long tails. A miserable howl rang out as the first heavenly ghost to rush out of the passage was torn to pieces on the spot. The other heavenly ghosts rolled on the ground in unison, while the trembling old heavenly ghosts behind them puffed out their chests at the same time and opened their mouths to spit out large sheets of green flame. These were the natal ghost flames of the heavenly ghosts who had once put Wuxia and others in a sorry state in Ji City. They were extremely filthy and destructive, accompanied by shrill ghost howls. Dozens of 100-feet thick ghost flames filled almost the entire passage, enveloping more than 100 heavenly ghosts in the passage at the same time. Their fleshly bodies had begun to wither, but the natal flames accumulated in them were several times stronger than those of the young and strong heavenly ghosts. The heavenly ghosts in the narrow passage were struggling and twitching in the monstrous flames. Although the ghostly flames were spurted out from the bodies of the heavenly ghosts, their natal ghostly flames were extremely lethal even to themselves. More than 100 heavenly ghosts were blocked by the flames in the narrow passage and burned crazily. There was really no way out for them. Before long, all the heavenly ghosts in the narrow passage were burned to a pulp. Apart from the dozens of heavenly ghosts at the back who fled with their bodies covered in flames, the other 30 or so heavenly ghosts at the front had been reduced to a puddle of pus. The ghostly fire ignited the pus that the heavenly ghosts had turned into, and just like adding a ladle of oil to a spark, the flames in the narrow passage grew stronger and stronger. But such a fierce ghost flame could not burn the mountain walls on either side. Wuxia was shocked. It seemed that the mountain wall was not an ordinary thing. Not only did it have such a strange and powerful gravitational force, but it was also impervious to the attack of the ghost flames. The heavenly ghosts outside the valley roared into the sky in exasperation for a while. Then, they leaped forward to put out the ghost flames on their companions who were burned and lucky enough to escape, then stood at the mouth of the passage, shouting and provoking desperately. However, the heavenly ghosts in the valley did not budge at all, and just guarded the narrow valley path. Wuxia pondered for a moment, then sent a voice transmission to Huang Liang inside the flying ship. Inside the jade-armored dark turtle flying ship, Huang Liang roared, and issued an order to the soldiers inside. Tens of thousands of small windows on both sides of the ship opened one by one, and the soldiers stood behind the windows with crossbows in their hands, looking down at the thousands of heavenly ghosts who were roaring wildly a few miles down below. These soldiers were using to use standard bone-piercing crossbows, which were specially designed for large-scale killing. Each crossbow could shoot 36 bolts at once, which were specially made from the bones of a demon beast, Akabane Dahong. They flew extremely fast, more than 10 times faster than the sword beams of ordinary heaven immortals. because of their incredible speed and the meticulously polished bolts inscribed with a large number of piercing runes. The bone-piercing crossbow, as its name suggested, had a very strong penetrating power. Even an ordinary heaven immortal with an immortal artifact would not be able to withstand the volley of bolts, let alone these heavenly ghosts. At Huang Liang's order, 10,000 bone-piercing crossbows fired at once. 360,000 specially made bone bolts, which were polished to the size of 10 hairs and no more than 1 foot and 2 inches long, shot out silently, covering the distance of a few miles in just a thousandth of a second. The bolts covered an area of several miles down below, leaving no blind spots. All of a sudden, the thousands of heavenly ghosts stopped moving. Their bodies stiffened, and countless tiny arrows of blood shot out of their bodies, rising more than 1,000 feet into the air. It was as if a dense forest of hemp had suddenly sprouted where they stood. Gradually, the bodies of these heavenly ghosts began to sway, and slowly, they fell to the ground reluctantly. As their huge bodies fell, they smashed into the ground, causing countless grains of sand and dust to spray up into the air along with the gust of wind. With a flick of his sleeve, Wuxia collected the 360,000 bolts shot by Huang Liang and the others. It was the first time he had seen 10,000 bone-piercing crossbows fired at once. Their lightning-fast speed and amazing penetrating power made Wuxia's scalp go numb. Yet, these bone bolts, which were no more than 1 foot and 2 inches long, had easily penetrated the ground of the ghost realm, which was dozens of times harder than steel, for more than 3 miles. What an amazing destructive power! And the soldiers who controlled the bone-piercing crossbows had not yet injected their own energies into the bolts. If a warrior whose cultivation base had reached the first Panga heaven, or above had injected his Panga's sacred energy into the bolts and fully activated the penetrating spell inscribed on the bolts, the penetrating power of the bolts would be increased by more than 100 times. It was no wonder that Diyu could besiege heaven immortals with ordinary soldiers. Sure enough, he had his reasons. After instructing Huang Liang and the others to stay alert in the sky and not show their faces, Wuxia patted Ao Buzan on the head. Ao Buzan understood, and let out a deafening dragon roar. Then he transformed into a black dragon that was 1,000 feet long, and as thick as a water tank. Dense watery clouds and black smoke rolled and tumbled under his feet, while his eyes shone with a golden gleam. 2 dragon whiskers, each hundreds of feet long, tore through the air and produced a shrill whistle. What a vigorous and ferocious divine dragon! Sitting on Ao Buzan's back, Wuxia slowly pushed away the clouds and descended into the valley. He exercised the dragon kill and grew to about 100 feet tall. 2 dragon horns grew out of his forehead, and his skin was covered with pitch-black dragon scales. He wore only a blood-red cloak wrapped around his waist as a battle skirt. Surrounded by a raging dark flame, he descended in front of the heavenly ghosts, riding on Ao Buzan. The hundreds of heavenly ghosts in the valley watched in horror as Wuxia and Ao Buzan descended. A huge and ferocious dragon, a strange yet ferocious and evil dragon man, and the dragon python sisters, who had transformed into 20 feet long dragon pythons and coiled around Wuxia's neck, looked no different from some ancient evil gods in the legends. Riding a black dragon, raising strange snakes, and covered in scales. What else could they be if not evil gods? Wuxia flicked his sleeve and pointed to the exit. The few heavenly ghosts looked at each other, then carefully followed Wuxia into the narrow passage and looked out of the valley. More than 1,000 heavenly ghosts were lying miserably on the ground, and their blood had formed a small lake on the ground. The few heavenly ghosts were so frightened that they screamed and ran back, scrambling to an old heavenly ghost who had a broken tail, an arm, and a leg, and stammered a few words. The old heavenly ghost was taken aback, then he raised his only arm, threw his head back and roared, and knelt down before Wuxia with hundreds of other heavenly ghosts. Speaking fluent human language, the old heavenly ghost kowtowed to Wuxia and said, "Your presence brings light to our humble dwelling. May I ask what business you have with me, and is there anything we can do to serve you?" Wuxia shuddered at the old heavenly ghost's fluent language, and his heart skipped a beat. How could this old fellow speak such a fluent human language? He even had a hint of Penghu continent's native accent. Wuxia cursed in his mind. Damn it! Then with a deep voice he asked, Are those people outside the valley your enemies? As soon as Wuxia asked the question, the heavenly ghosts kneeling on the ground burst into tears at the same time. Chapter 751. Hundreds of heavenly ghosts, who were more than 100 feet tall and 300 feet long, and covered in bone spikes, were kneeling on the ground and wailing like kindergartners being bullied by their classmates. Wuxia stared blankly at the group of extremely emotional heavenly ghosts and shook his head blankly. Who said heavenly ghosts were a bunch of brainless creatures? Who said they knew nothing but killing and devouring? Who said they knew nothing but killing and devouring? Whoever made up these words should have their tongues cut out. Wuxia took a deep breath and jumped off Aobuzen's back as he looked at the heavenly ghosts in front of him, who were crying with rich expressions, the deep pain in their scarlet eyes, and felt the sorrow emanating from the bottom of their hearts. He helped the old heavenly ghost, who could speak fluent human language, to his feet and asked in a deep voice, "What injustice have you suffered? Tell me quickly, and I'll help you." Wuxia did not think that these heavenly ghosts were the terrible ones in the legends, the kind of ferocious creatures who coveted the flesh and blood of humans and cultivators and knew nothing but killing. These heavenly ghosts in front of him were not only sentient, but also possessed intelligence. They were affectionate, sentimental, and had their own social structure and division of labor. What was the difference between them and human beings? The heavenly ghosts outside the valley, on the other hand, were exactly the kind of heavenly ghosts in the legends. Wuxia did not feel any pressure to kill them. They were just a bunch of greedy and bloodthirsty beasts. The old heavenly ghost raised his head and began to tell Wuxia the story of his clan while crying. In the ghost realm, during the apocalypse of heaven and earth, many almighty experts had broken a piece of Pangu continent. This piece of land, measuring trillions of miles in circumference, had flown into the depths of the starry sky and merged with the first wisp of innate ghost energy since the creation of heaven and earth, thus forming the ghost realm, a unique domain that struck terror into the hearts of the outside world. There were countless corpses of almighty experts on this piece of land. Nourished by the innate ghost energy, these corpses gradually evolved into the first batch of heavenly ghosts in the ghost realm. Because of the ghost energy's greedy nature of devouring, these heavenly ghosts were ferocious and bloodthirsty, and loved to plunder blood and food. Their instinct was to kill and devour. But after countless eons of evolution, generations of heavenly ghosts were born in the ghost realm, and among them, many brilliant geniuses emerged. These geniuses comprehended the supreme Tao of heaven and earth, from which they comprehended the cultivation path of the heavenly ghosts. From relying on instinct to devour everything to strengthen their own cultivation base, they gradually evolved to relying on self-cultivation to improve their cultivation base. With the growth of their cultivation base, the intelligence of the heavenly ghosts also became higher and higher. Those heavenly ghosts with stronger cultivation bases could gradually eliminate the trace of ferocious aura brought about by their innate nature. These powerful ghost cultivators possessed extremely high intelligence and great power. They established their own territories in the 9 Nether Ghost realm, and gradually evolved into the famous 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 800 ghost saints of the 9 Nether Ghost realm. The 13 great heavenly ghost kings were experienced primordial immortals, while the 800 ghost sages were all peak-level gold immortals. It was even rumored that some of them had long since broken through the bottleneck of primordial immortals and attained primordial golden bodies. Relying on the unique geographical environment of the ghost realm, these 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 800 ghost sages dominated a region. Even those lofty figures of the celestial court who tried to control everything in their hands could do nothing to these powerful existences. Once, a primordial immortal from the celestial court invaded the ghost realm, and tried in vain to make the 13 great heavenly ghost kings obey the edict of the celestial court. But the primordial immortal and the subsequent waves of reinforcements were all defeated by the 13 great heavenly ghost kings. If it had not been for the interference of unknown existences, the celestial court would have lost at least a few celestial emperors in that battle. The direct ancestor of the branch of heavenly ghosts in front of Wuxia was also a genius. Born in a small clan in the ghost realm, he had attained the strength close to the peak-level gold immortal through hard cultivation, and had established his own foundation in the ghost realm, gradually gaining a powerful force. But whether it was the human world or the ghost realm, all kinds of melodramatic plots were happening all the time, and everywhere that Wuxia found extremely melodramatic. Because of his handsome and charming appearance, this newly born expert in the ghost realm caught the eye of a female ghost sage from the neighboring territory, who sent him a powerful invitation to perform dual cultivation with him. Now that a ghost sage who had awed the ghost realm for countless years had taken a fancy to him, according to common sense, this ancestor should have happily washed himself and sent himself to the ghost sage's bed. But something happened that made Wuxia want to vomit blood. This ancestor was the only infatuated person in the entire ghost realm since the creation of the world. Infatuated people naturally had to do things that were infatuated with love. This ancestor had just given birth to a litter of young children with his lover, so how could he care less about the ghost sage's invitation? Instead, he was enraged for his beauty and led his army to attack the ghost saint's territory. The female ghost sage felt that her face had been mercilessly trampled on, so she was also furious. She called a few ghost sages who were on good terms with her to join forces and wipe out the ancestor's army. They beat the ancestor into ashes and divided up his territory. Only the great ancestor's lover escaped with their family of 80 young children. They did not dare to stay in the territory of the ghostly sages. Instead, they fled to the most desolate countryside in the world of ghosts and souls to settle down. This branch of heavenly ghosts had secretly settled down here. As the saying goes, cut their way through brambles and thorns, struggled hard against countless fierce monsters, and paid a lot of sweat and blood. After several generations of development, they finally had a population of more than 3,000. Wuxia could not help but be shocked when he heard this. A litter of 80 young children? It was said that heavenly ghosts had an amazing reproductive ability, but how could they give birth to 80 children in one litter? It suddenly dawned on Wuxia why the legendary almighty expert strictly forbade heavenly ghosts from developing their territories outside the ghost realm. If dozens of heavenly ghosts were allowed to sneak into outer heavenly realms, it would not take many years for the entire outer heavenly realms to be filled with heavenly ghosts, according to the way they multiplied. Then, to Wuxia's surprise, after several generations of reproduction, these heavenly ghosts had only produced a population of about 3,000. It was obvious that it was not easy to survive in this wilderness. However, only a few hundred people were left out of the original 3,000. Could it be related to the heavenly ghosts outside? Sobbing, the old heavenly ghost continued to tell Wuxia about the history of the development of his clan. As Wuxia expected, when this clan of heavenly ghosts was flourishing, a large clan of heavenly ghosts with a population of 10,000 suddenly moved to a place less than 300 miles away from them. On top of that, they were the primitive heavenly ghosts, the most troublesome species in the realm. In terms that Wuxia was familiar with, these so-called primitive heavenly ghosts were uncivilized savages, cannibals, and the like. These heavenly ghosts were just born naturally in the ghost realm. They were either born from the corpses of dead heavenly ghosts, or from the bodies of all kinds of dead creatures. They were born ferocious and barbaric, and never listened to any reason. Primitive heavenly ghosts had no intelligence. Once, a powerful heavenly ghost cultivator had slaughtered hundreds of millions of primitive heavenly ghosts and dissected their bodies, only to find that all of them had brains the size of walnuts, and it was impossible for them to have any intelligence. Only after generations of evolution could they produce a few intelligent geniuses, and only then would these primitive heavenly ghosts embark on the path of pursuing the heavenly Tao and constantly strengthening themselves. It was unknown what kind of powerful monster these primitive heavenly ghosts had come from, but their overall strength was even stronger than the heavenly ghosts in the valley who had cultivated. Since the first encounter between the two sides, these primitive heavenly ghosts had regarded the heavenly ghosts in the valley as their prey. They did not come for flesh and blood, but for the female heavenly ghosts in the valley. Hunting and reproduction were the instincts of primitive heavenly ghosts, and they would seize any opportunity to reproduce and strengthen their clan. Therefore, when they discovered the valley, they had tried every means to capture the female heavenly ghosts in the valley. Caught off guard, the primitive heavenly ghosts had captured nearly 1,000 females, and the rest of their clansmen had been killed in the fight. Today, Wuxia saw that the heavenly ghosts in the valley had only sent a few young men to hunt for food, while the rest of the 300 or so young men had gone to the enemy's lair, trying to find a chance to rescue some of their clansmen. In the end, instead of rescuing their clansmen, they attracted a large number of enemies. If Wuxia had not killed more than 1,000 of the enemy's heavenly ghosts, all the heavenly ghosts in the valley would have starved to death if they had stayed in the valley. In the outside world, the summoned heavenly ghosts could devour the natural energy to replenish themselves, so they did not need to eat. But in the ghost realm, although the air was filled with rich innate ghost energy, which was the source of all heavenly ghosts, it could not fill the stomachs of fully formed heavenly ghosts. They had to hunt and devour food. Only by devouring food could they gradually refine the innate ghost energy with the help of the food's blood essence and aura, making themselves stronger and stronger. Even the 13 great heavenly ghost kings had to devour huge amounts of food to sustain their lives in the ghost realm, let alone these heavenly ghosts in the valley, who were relatively weak in comparison. After understanding the ins and outs of the matter, Wuxia stroked his chin as he looked at the heavenly ghosts in front of him, and he could not help but have some bad thoughts. There were 80 of them in one birth, and the newborn heavenly ghosts were already very strong. They could travel freely through the void and spit out vicious ghost fire. Among them, there was no lack of talented people who could cultivate to the realm of gold immortal and primordial immortal. They were a great source of soldiers. As long as their population was carefully controlled, and their family planning was carried out, Wuxia did not mind having an army of heavenly ghosts under his command, especially since these heavenly ghosts had been living in the ghost realm all day long without seeing the light of day. They would surely suffer from mental illness. How merciful and virtuous it would be to bring them to Pangu continent, and let them see the blue sky, the white clouds, the fresh flowers and the green grass. He had to think of a way to trick these heavenly ghosts into his hands. After pondering for a moment, Wuxia suddenly stamped his foot and roared furiously. They are simply lawless. How dare those primitive heavenly ghosts do this? Lead the way now, and I'll wipe them out for you right now. Kill all the males and bring all the females back to be your wives. The hundreds of heavenly ghosts kneeling in the valley were stunned, and then they jumped to their feet at the same time and let out deafening cheers. Chapter 752. On the beach of the East Sea, 18 celestial fiend puppets stood in a straight line behind Princess Zhonglu. Some of these puppets were released by Wuxia in Yuxiong Plain, while some were summoned back by Princess Zhonglu with a mystic technique Wuxia had left behind. Years ago, when Wuxia was attacked by Taoist Qi and Taoist Min with a primordial gold talisman, he had released these puppets and sent them to various places on Pangu continent to develop their own power. Later, when Wuxia rescued tens of thousands of cultivators and immortals from the mines in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean, he sent them back to East Sea City as soon as possible. After learning that Wuxia was in some unknown place after the void was torn apart, Princess Zhonglu immediately summoned all the puppets and ordered them to bring all their subordinates, as well as all the natural treasures and money they had accumulated over the years, back to East Sea City as soon as possible. Thanks to the war between Diyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance, the so-called chaotic times were the most convenient for people to profit from. These puppets had gathered tens of thousands of immortals and itinerant cultivators whose homes had been destroyed, and taken advantage of the fact that the military of Diyu had no time to deal with them, to wantonly mine mineral veins and collect natural treasures, bringing back countless rare and precious items. Nearly 100,000 cultivators and immortals were now hiding in the Dragon Palace built by Lord Xiansheng and others in the depths of the East Sea. Here, Princess Zhonglu was listening to the information brought to her by a few secret agents of Scouting Office. The 18 celestial fiend puppets stood behind her without saying a word, fixing their deep and merciless eyes at the few secret agents of Scouting Office. The tremendous pressure emanated from them made cold sweat roll down their foreheads, but their bodies were still as taut as steel wires, and they did not tremble or waver. The news of Wuqia's disappearance had reached Zhong Province, and as expected, Yumu was the first to jump out. He openly claimed that since Wuxia had perished together with those vengeful divine beasts, and had no heir to inherit his title, He should be stripped of his title of Marquis of East Sea Province and taken back the vast territory of East Sea Province. Yumu even suggested that since the East Sea Province was built from a large piece of land in Zhong Province should have jurisdiction over the East Sea Province. He also proposed to all the wealthy clans and nobles in Zhong Province that after the East Sea Province was taken back, all the wealthy clans in Zhong Province should send their elite disciples to compete for the power of prefecture overseer of East Sea Province, so that the East Sea Province, a vast and populous province, could not fall into chaos. Yes, the East Sea Province had a large population nowadays. After the human emperor issued an imperial edict to confer Wuxia the title of third-grade Marquis of East Sea Province, the East Sea Province was included in the list of third-grade provinces in DU. A third-grade province should have its own style. At least, in terms of population, a mere few million people was not worthy of the title. Therefore, the officials of DU were busy migrating to the East Sea Province, and Gao was a good man to the end. In just a few days, thousands of his people had begun to move to the East Sea Province. No matter how one looked at it, the East Sea Province was a huge province with a land area comparable to several ordinary provinces, and its population was destined to grow rapidly. It was a big fat piece of meat. Even without Yumu jumping out to stir up trouble, the East Sea Province had already aroused the greed of countless people. But after Yumu's public outcry, many wealthy clans and nobles in Zhong Province began to chime in, asking Bo Zhongfu to quickly submit a memorial to the human emperor. If Wuqi could not fulfill his duty as the prefecture overseer of East Sea Province, then the land of East Sea Province and the title of Marquis of East Sea Province should be taken back. What these spies brought them was the news that Yumu had colluded with many influential figures in Zhong Province in the past few days. With her hands tucked under her sleeves, Princess Zhonglu looked calmly at the moon that was slowly rising over the horizon. "How could Wuqi die so easily?" she said in a gentle voice. "I can feel that he is still alive, and he is plotting something bad." With a faint smile, Princess Zhonglu said coolly, "But since someone is courting death, let's teach him a lesson. We have to step up the assassination of Yu Miao's lineal clan members, increase the manpower, and kill everyone related to him at all costs, including the relatives of the servants and servants in his mansion. Kill everyone who is related to him." With a strange gleam flashing in her eyes, Princess Zhonglu said in a cold voice, "Tell Brother Qingfen that all the manpower in East Sea Province is at his disposal. Except for our lineal descendants, all the immortals, itinerant cultivators, and mountain spirits and aquatic monsters who have been subdued by us are at his disposal. Do whatever you can to make Yumu suffer. Use the cruelest means to retaliate against him. Kill his male relatives, abduct his female relatives, and spread the news that Yumu's relatives have been tortured and killed as fast as you can. Let the whole world know that Yumu can't even protect his own relatives." With a grim laugh, Princess Zhonglu clenched her teeth and said, "Kill those influential figures in Zhong Province who colluded with Yumu if you can, and kill those whose defenses are tight or whose overall strength is too strong to assassinate. Kill their children and grandchildren. In short, make them suffer. If their children and grandchildren are well guarded, poison the rivers in their territories, burn their farmlands and forests, destroy their underground energy veins, spread all kinds of plagues, and disturb their territories." With a flick of her long sleeves, 2 gusts of wind came whistling out and smashed a few large reefs on the beach. "Since they are coveting our territories, let us destroy them," Princess Zhonglu cried out sternly. "No matter the cost, no matter the means, no matter the casualties, we have to deter them, destroy them, make them howl, make them fear, make them despair, and make them kneel before us and weep bitterly." A 5-colored divine ray towered into the sky from the top of Princess Zhongli's head. A terrible aura swept out in all directions, and an enormous and mysterious force enveloped the entire East Sea Province in a flash. Thunderclouds churned high up in the sky, and countless thunderbolts smashed in all directions, but none of them dared to get close to Princess Zhonglu. A strange voice slowly came out of Princess Zhongli's mouth. As she chanted, swarms of locusts rose out of the ground, forming a large dark cloud that spread in all directions. Tiny, invisible toxins and plague viruses quickly multiplied in the air, spreading into the distance as Princess Zhonglu willed it. Invisible curses took shape in the void. And at the same time, the mountains, rivers, flowers, trees, birds, and beasts in the East Sea province began to make strange noises that mortals, cultivators, immortals, and even the oracles and warriors of Du could not hear. These curses spread in the air, quickly turning into ominous forces of disaster that struck at some of the people Princess Zhonglu had been thinking about in her mind. The ancient Tao of divinity, the divine meridians of heavenly wrath, the Tao of the god of scourge. Princess Zhongli's beautiful hair suddenly turned an ominous purple-red color, and her eyes shone with a magnificent red gleam that made one despair. As she recited the words in a low voice, a ring of purple-red divine light suddenly appeared amidst the five-colored divine light hovering over her head. Amidst the divine light was a shrine inlaid with gold and jade, in which sat a goddess, no more than 3 feet tall, who looked exactly like Princess Zhonglu, sitting proudly on the throne. Because of the tremendous pressure brought by Wu Qi's disappearance, and the great fury brought by Yu Miao and the others, the bloodline of the divine path in Princess Zhongli's body was stimulated. In that instant, she communicated with heaven and earth, broke through the current bottleneck, and formed the first golden body of the ancient god in the bloodline of the heaven god she had inherited. This golden body of the ancient god controlled the Tao of the scourge of the divine bloodline of the ancient gods, a terrible divine path that specialized in bringing all kinds of disasters to the world. As soon as Princess Zhonglu reached this level, she immediately mastered the 3 terrible powers of plague, and evil spirit curses, and immediately launched an attack on the enemies she had identified in her mind. As soon as these locusts were formed, they disappeared into the void after flying for tens of miles. Not long after, they appeared out of thin air in some of the provinces ruled by the rich and powerful families in Zhong province. It was the same for the viruses. They disappeared and reappeared out of thin air, spreading rapidly in some of the provinces. The invisible curse had even attached itself to some people, such as the few sons whom Yu Miao trusted the most, who were having a secret discussion with Yu Miao with a smile on their faces. They let out inexplicable howls and fell to the ground. Abscesses quickly grew on their bodies, and all kinds of strange diseases began to spread rapidly. Some even had a few hairy poisonous insects crawling out of their eye sockets. Yu Miao cried out in horror. He hurriedly cast a spell to save his sons, but the divine power of the ancient god of scourge was completely different from the spells of ghosts and deities he was proficient in. His spell was not the right one, and he could only barely control the diseases of his sons. How could he save them? A very interesting divine power. Princess Zhonglu narrowed her eyes and smiled. She looked at her own hands and giggled. The goddess in the shrine made of 5-colored divine light above her head laughed in the same way. But while Princess Zhongli's laughter was crisp and charming, the goddess's laughter was filled with a gloomy and mysterious air, filled with the uneasiness and fear of an impending disaster. Gently stroking her long hair, Princess Zhongli said coolly, "All right, go and deliver the order. It's settled. Don't let Yu Miao and others have an easy time. Make everyone's attention focus on them. And by time for Marquis of Prefecture to come back." Her long crimson hair slowly returned to normal. After bowing deeply, the few secret agents of Scouting Office quickly turned into black shadows and vanished. Looking up at the sky, Princess Zhonglu frowned slightly and said, "A very interesting divine power, but I'm still too weak to deal with Yu Miao and others. I need stronger power. Sacrifice those immortals and itinerant cultivators you've gathered. This is all they can do." The 18 celestial fiend puppets bowed silently, then quickly turned into shadows and plunged into the sea. Princess Zhonglu frowned slightly. Before Wu Qi came back, she had to take care of Wu Qi's territory. Whoever dared to put their hands in it would have to be prepared to have their necks cut off by Princess Zhonglu. "How dare you take advantage of my husband? Are you all courting death? Hee, let me see if any of your daughters and granddaughters are beautiful. My husband doesn't even have a concubine until now. That's not fair to my status. How can my husband not have thousands of concubines?" With her hands clasped behind her back, Princess Zhonglu paced slowly on the beach, her steps filled with a chilling killing intent. It was a killing intent that was even more frightening than Wu Qi's rage. Chapter 753. Mount Hanyu, outside Zhongning City in Zhong Province. Inside a cave made of xianbing, Yu Miao stood beside a bed made of cold jade, his teeth clenched and his body trembling as he looked at his two sons, who were lying on the bed and howling in pain. His two sons had completely lost their human forms. They were handsome and charming, but now they had turned into two pieces of rotten, swollen flesh. Stinky pus kept dripping out of the black, rotten flesh. Some unknown worms were crawling in their bodies, and from time to time, soft chewing sounds could be heard coming from their bodies. The group of elders from Yu clan in Zhong province stood around the bed with unsightly faces, their eyes fixed on the secluded elder, who was examining the injuries of Yu Miao's sons. For hours ago, when they were discussing with Yu Miao how to take over Donghai province, in front of everyone, Yu Miao's two sons suddenly fell to the ground with a wail, their strange injuries getting out of hand. Even with the abilities of Yu Miao and the elders, they could not save them, so they had no choice but to bring them to Mount Hanyu in a hurry and ask the secluded elder to save them. With a grave face, the secluded elder examined the bodies of the two injured men. Carefully, he extracted a part of the stinking liquid that flowed out of their bodies and tested the reaction of the liquid with several kinds of medicinal concoctions. In the end, he still could not figure out how the injuries were caused. After a moment of pondering, the secluded elder produced a jade knife and carefully dug out a wriggling bug covered with black poisonous stingers from their wounds. As soon as the bug, which was less than an inch long, saw the light around it, it immediately expanded to the size of a human head. Then, it exploded into pieces with a loud boom, sending countless poisonous hairs flying in all directions. Yu Miao and the others were so frightened that they hastily made their move. Bone talismans of various colors produced a large curtain of light to protect everyone. The black, extremely sharp and fine poisonous stinger darted out, bumping against the light shield created by the bone talisman along with an ear-piercing swishing sound. The poisonous stinger was blown into pieces by the tremendous counterforce, turning into black smoke and disappearing into nothingness. Even the bug had turned into a wisp of smoke, slowly dissipating in the air. The secluded elder's face turned even more unsightly. He looked at Yu Miao with a very serious expression and said in a deep voice, "Who the hell have you offended? This is not the magic that we, the Directorate of Celestials, are familiar with. It seems to be the heavenly wrath cast by an innate deity who had mastered the great Tao of heaven and earth in the ancient times. All of the injuries, including these poisonous insects, are formed from divine power. They seem real yet not real, seem fake yet not fake." After sighing with emotion, the secluded elder shook his head and said, "The ancient Tao of divinity. They are the true gods who were born from the heavenly Tao and have the destiny in their hands. The Tao of ghost and deity used by the Directorate of Celestials today is not comparable to them. All of you know that the so-called ghosts and deities that we worship are actually just powerful demons from the outer realms. They can't be compared to the true ancient gods." Yu Miao's face twisted as he gritted his teeth and asked, "Is there any way to save him?" The secluded elder pondered for a moment and nodded seriously. "Of course there is a way to save him." Yu Mu was wild with joy. He quickly bowed and said, "Great-grandfather, please." The secluded elder glared at him and said with a cold snort, "Of course there is a way to save him, but it's a pity that I don't know it. Perhaps the secret palace of Du has the corresponding books and mystic techniques? But there is absolutely nothing in the Directorate of Celestials of Zhong province. You should know that the imperial court of Du does have the bloodline of the ancient gods, but the descendants of these gods are all targets of Du. There can't be such a person in Zhong province." The secluded elder's words disappointed Yu Miao, who was overjoyed. "Since you don't know the way to save him, why did you say that just now? Wouldn't that make me happy for nothing?" Looking down at his two sons, who were wailing in pain, Yu Miao's heart was bleeding. Although Yu Miao had many children, at least 100 times more than Yu Miao, who had taken away the power of the clan master, only a few of them could become powerful. It was especially true for a clan that belonged to the Directorate of Celestials like Yu clan. The strength of a clan depended on how many of its descendants had the ability to communicate with ghosts and deities, and cultivate magic and divine abilities. Among Yu Miao's many children, only 30% of them had the aptitude for cultivation, and only 3 of them had the aptitude comparable to Yu Miao. Of the 3 best sons, Yulei had been killed by Wuxia, and these 2 were the only ones Yu Miao could count on to overthrow Yu Miao and regain control of Yu clan in the future. Although these 2 sons were young, they were cunning and resourceful, and had become very good assistants to Yu Miao in daily affairs. Their cultivation bases were close to the level of sun priests, and they could be considered as the best among the younger generation of the Central Plains. But he could only watch them howl and struggle in front of him, and watch their lives being devoured by an unknown vicious curse. The muscles on his face twitched as he asked dryly, "Great-grandfather, do you have a way to get the method to break the curse from the secret palace?" The secluded elder looked up at Yu Miao and asked in a flat voice, "Has the Yu clan of Zhong province ever had a relationship with the secret palace?" All the elders present shook their heads at the same time. They looked at each other with strange expressions on their faces. How could a mere Yu clan of Zhong province have a relationship with the secret palace? On the other hand, the Yu clan of Liangzhu had a strong influence in the secret palace. But everyone present knew the relationship between the Yu clan of Liangzhu and the branch of the Yu clan of Zhong province represented by Yu Miao, and no one expected to get any help from the Yu clan of Liangzhu. Yu Miao cleared his throat and frowned as he looked at his son, who was howling in pain. "I heard that some of Yu Miao's immediate seniors hold a high position in the secret palace. If I just ask them to help me break the curse." The secluded elder rose to his feet slowly, shook his head and sighed. "You can make your own decision. If you ask Yu Miao for help, you can forget about regaining control of the Yu clan of Zhong province for the rest of your life. The 2 best sons and the power of the Yu clan of Zhong province. You decide for yourself." Sighing deeply, the secluded elder walked slowly into the cave with his hands clasped behind his back. "Strange, the ancient Tao of divinity?" he murmured in a low voice as he walked. "Such a strange power. I've seen an incomplete ancient text when I was young, and it seems to be the divine power of the lineage of heavenly wrath. But as for the divine power of the lineage of heavenly wrath, there are only a few descendants of the ancient bloodline of the Hamba clan and Shangliu clan who are worshipped by the secret palace in Diyu now, and their divine power is completely different from what I'm seeing now." The elders of the Yu clan looked helplessly at the secluded elder's back, then turned to look at Yu Miao. Yu Miao sat down weakly on the cold jade bed. He stared blankly at his 2 sons, and tears suddenly rolled down his cheeks. He could not remember how many years it had been since he last shed tears. It seemed that he had not shed tears since he was 7 years old, when he killed a few disobedient servants with a curse for the first time. After so many years of ups and downs, he had always thought that he had a heart of stone, and that he would never be sad again. But now, it seemed that he had overestimated himself. A man does not shed tears easily, but only when he is deeply hurt. Tears were rolling down his cheeks at the moment, and his mind was in a mess. Who is the one who has plotted against my son? I've exerted all my strength, and even asked Lord Gui Shao to divine the cause and effect behind this, but why can't I find out who is the culprit? Who could have such a divine ability to block out all the karmic connections, and prevent me from finding him? The elders were speechless. Not only had Yu Miao used all his strength to find the culprit, but they had also cooperated with him. Logically speaking, with so many sun oracles working together, even a supreme oracle could not completely block out the aura left behind by the curse. But they could not find even the slightest clue. Could it be that the culprit was in existence stronger than a supreme oracle? That was simply preposterous. Not to mention that supreme oracles were the representatives of the pinnacle of power in this world. Even if there was an existence stronger than them, why would he do this to Yu Miao's son? Why couldn't he just kill Yu Miao? The elders looked at each other and lost the ability to calculate. Yu Miao clenched his teeth and looked at his son, hesitating whether he should make peace with him. Perhaps he could only rely on Yu Miao's power to get help from the secret palace? But once he bowed to Yu Miao, the power of the Yu clan in Zhong province would never return to Yu Miao. As the secluded elder had said, it was up to Yu Miao to decide which was more important: the power of the Yu clan in Zhong province, or the lives of his 2 sons. Just as he was hesitating, a few young oracles rushed in, bowed to Yu Miao in panic, and told him a lot of news that made his eyes turn red and almost drive him mad. First, the nobles who had colluded with Yu Miao and were preparing to dismember the East Sea province. Just an hour ago, a huge plague of locusts and a plague broke out in their territories almost at the same time. Huge swarms of locusts, each measuring more than 10 feet long, blotted out the sky and the earth. And in just a quarter of an hour, they had devoured almost everything edible in their territories. At the same time, more than 90% of the people in their territories were bedridden because of the plague. Second, Yu Miao's sons and daughters, as well as the descendants of many elders of the Yu clan, had been cursed by a vicious curse at the same time. In just less than an hour, several of them had turned into pus and blood and died, while some had even used various magical artifacts and magic to attack their relatives as if they had lost their minds. At the moment, the Yu clan's mansion in Zhong province was covered in blood. Third, many shops owned by Yu Miao had caught fire at the same time. A large number of precious goods had been burned to the ground, and a large number of shopkeepers and waiters had been killed. The loss was extremely heavy. According to the news gathered a quarter of an hour ago, Yu Miao was now destitute, excluding the money he had stashed in the vault in his mansion. One message after another, accompanied by the cawing of black crows, almost made Yu Zong faint. His body swayed as he roared. The East Sea province must have something to do with Tan Lang. I won't let him go. I won't let him go. Yu Miao was driven mad, and he had fallen into a state of madness. It was clear that the plague of locusts was happening in the territories of those nobles who had colluded with Yu Miao, and it had nothing to do with Wuxia or the East Sea province. Who would believe that? Yu Miao had made up his mind to destroy the East Sea province at all costs. Chapter 754. In the mansion of Yu clan in Zhongning City, the killing caused by the sudden madness of some of Yu Miao's descendants had been stopped. But in just the time it took to finish a meal, more than 70 of Yu Miao's direct descendants had either been killed or committed suicide, and more than 1,000 servants and guards had been killed because of them. When one of Yu Miao's great-grandsons was in a frenzy, he used the flesh, blood, and souls of a few maids to summon the ghost god he worshipped. With the power of the ghost god, he almost slaughtered a private army of Yu clan that was passing by his house. 300 elite soldiers were easily killed by the ghost, and if it had not been for Yu Miao and the group of elders, the ghost would have turned the whole mansion into a land of death. The huge mansion was covered in blood. Standing on the high steps in front of the main hall, Yu Miao watched the frightened servants wash the blood away and clean up the broken pieces of flesh and internal organs. His brows were knitted into a tight knot. What happened this time was so bizarre. Suddenly, so many members of the Yu clan went crazy, and all of them were Yu Miao's direct descendants. It made Yu Miao feel refreshed, but at the same time puzzled. Who was it that did this to Yu Miao's people? Although he was very happy that Yu Miao had lost more than 70 of his children and grandchildren, he was very annoyed that the blame might fall on his head if he did not handle it well. As the current clan leader of the Yu clan in Zhong province, Yu Miao had gathered a group of elders around him, and his power was stronger than Yu Miao's. Therefore, after quickly putting an end to the sudden killing and ordering the members of the Yu clan to keep the news under wraps, all the information was quickly fed back to Yu Miao. Yu Miao's sons were in big trouble. 2 of his proudest sons had been cursed and sent to Mount Hanyu for help. Even the shops and businesses under his name were burned down at the same time. It was a direct blow to Yu Miao's financial resources, and his whole family might have to live on porridge in the future. Wonderful. The question is, who did it? Yu Mu tilted his head and pondered the question. Even Yu Mu was not sure if he had the strength to deal such a heavy blow to Yu Miao in such a short time. Of course, Yu Miao's strength was much stronger than Yu Miao's, but he could only mobilize the members of the Yu clan in Zhong province. Once these people were mobilized, Yu Miao would be able to find out what they were doing and quickly come up with a countermeasure. Therefore, Yu Miao knew that he could not deal such a heavy and quick blow to Yu Miao. Could it be someone else from the Central Plains? Yu Mu shook his head again. Such strength was not something that any clan in the Central Plains could achieve. As an outsider, Bo Zhongfu had just straightened out the relationship in Zhong province over the past 2 years, and was busy holding the real power in Zhong province. So, how could he have the time to deal with Yu Miao? Besides, There was no personal grudge between him and Yu Miao. In that case, were they the branches of the aristocratic families in Liangzhu that Bo Zhongfu brought? That was even more impossible. After all, Yu clan was the local tyrant of Zhong province. After the former prefecture overseer, Feng Lingling, and many other influential clans in Zhong province were purged, Yu clan had become the largest native clan in Zhong province. Although these outsider clans were very strong, they were not as resourceful as Yu clan in all aspects. So they could not have done such a thing without Yu Miao or Yu Miao's eyes and ears. Laughing conceitedly, Yu Miao shook his head and muttered, "They don't have the strength to do this either. Those aristocratic families brought by Bo Zhongfu are typical official clans, and they don't have such a strong overall strength." Just as Yu Miao was wondering who had done this, one of his trusted disciples hurried in, bowed to him, and reported in a low voice, "Grand Oracle, Ji Zixuan, the fiancé of Tan Lang, the Marquis of Yi Province, requests an audience." Tan Lang's fiancé? Yu Miao looked at his disciple in astonishment, then almost jumped to his feet. "What did you say her name was? Ji Zixuan? Is that?" Ji. On Panga continent, the surnames of ordinary people were extremely simple. They were nothing more than mountains, rivers, lakes, seas, flowers, trees, beasts, and birds. Even names could not escape from the category of all living things under the heaven. But the surnames of those aristocratic clans in the Yu dynasty had their own unique origins. Some of them came from ancient gods and almighty experts, some from ancient powerful clans, and some were branches evolved from some great surname. In the Yu dynasty, there was only one clan that used the surname Ji, and that clan was also surnamed Gongsun. But they would only use the surname Gongsun on formal occasions when they were offering sacrifices to their ancestors, ghosts, and deities. Usually, they met people with the surname Ji. This clan was the imperial clan of the current human emperor of the Yu dynasty, and the bloodline of this clan was the direct descendant of the human emperor, the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan. Yu Miao felt his head spin when he heard that Wu Qi's fiancée was called Ji Zixuan. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, he could not think of a daughter named Zixuan in the current human emperor's clan. After a long pause, he murmured in a low voice, "She has not returned to Liangzhu for hundreds of years. Could she be the daughter of some king? Could it be that some king has taken a fancy to Tan Lang's future and has betrothed his daughter to him?" Clapping his hands, Yu Miao smiled thoughtfully and said, "Wonderful. I see. If she is really the daughter of a king, it makes sense that Yu Miao was set up by someone." Glaring fiercely at his disciple, Yu Miao said in a deep voice, "Open the front gate and welcome her." "No, I'll go welcome her myself." Amidst the surprised gazes of his clan members and servants, Yu Miao strode toward the front mansion with a beaming face. His body swayed slightly, and he had changed into a pitch-black brocade robe, embroidered with dark patterns of mountains and rivers. It was a robe that the nobles of Da Yu would only wear when they met the most distinguished guests. Upon seeing Yu Miao change into this robe, his trusted disciples and subordinates hurried to his side, lining up in Chi-Chi to welcome him. Outside the Yu family's residence, the number of guards at the entrance had increased by a few times due to the previous incident. There were now more than 2,000 guards blocking the entrance of the Yu family's residence, and a large number of private guards patrolling the streets, preventing anyone from getting close. In the square outside the front gate, Princess Zhonglu, dressed in a gorgeous palace dress and with her hair tied up in a high bun, was studying the front gate of Yu clan like a goddess who had just walked out of the prehistoric times. She was dressed in gorgeous clothes, and her temperament was elegant and otherworldly. As a member of the royal family, she naturally exuded an air of nobility, which frightened the group of guards in front of her so much that they did not dare to look her in the eye. Little Kair, who had eaten and drunk her fill, stood blankly on Princess Zhongli's shoulder, her eyes staring blankly like a sparrow carved out of wood. Yu Miao strode out of the door and saw Princess Zhongli standing alone. He took a deep breath. Not to mention Princess Zhongli's beauty and clothes, just her noble temperament alone made his heart skip a beat. In particular, Princess Zhongli's temperament was so lofty that even some of the princes from the imperial clan whom Yu Miao had met in Liangzhu could not compare. Although she was standing alone, Princess Zhongli gave off the feeling of a god from the ancient times, who stood proudly in the world and did not allow anyone to offend or get close to her. Anyone who came before her was like an ant, and they could only worship and look at her. No one could have a fair talk with her face to face. This girl comes from an extraordinary background. The closer he got to Princess Zhonglu, the greater the pressure he felt. When he was less than 30 feet away from Princess Zhonglu, the pressure made him unable to breathe or walk freely. His soul seemed to be howling, forcing him to kneel before Princess Zhonglu. Yu Miao turned to look at Princess Zhonglu in horror. What was going on? He did not have such a strange feeling when he met those princes from Diyu's imperial clan in those years. Princess Zhonglu put her hands under her sleeves, squinted at Yu Miao, and asked coolly, "Are you Yu Miao, the current clan master of Yu clan in Zhong province?" As soon as she spoke, an indescribable air of majesty rose from her, and there was a sense of uneasy crisis hidden in it. The strange pressure made Yu Miao's heart convulse, and he nearly fainted from it. Yu Miao's cultivation base was much stronger than Princess Zhongli's, but his soul was far weaker than Princess Zhongli's. He was just an ordinary mortal. Even though his cultivation base had reached the level of a sun oracle, the essence of his soul was still that of a mortal. Princess Zhonglu, on the other hand, had formed an innate divine soul, which made the essence of her soul much stronger than Yu Miao's. On top of that, she had recently formed the golden body of ancient god, which had elevated her soul to the level of a real ancient god. When the soul of a mortal faced the soul of a god, it was like an adult sheep facing a tiger cub. Even though Yu Miao's cultivation base was stronger than Princess Zhongli's, he could only surrender before the pressure emanating from Princess Zhongli's divine soul, and could not muster any thought of resistance. Faced with Princess Zhongli's question, Yu Miao bowed slightly and said, "Yes, I am Yu Miao. May I ask who you are?" "I'm the fiancé of Tanlang, the Marquis of East Sea Province," Princess Zhonglu said coolly. "I'm the fiancé of Tanlang, the Marquis of East Sea Province. When he is traveling, I'm in charge of all the affairs in East Sea Province. Yu Miao is plotting against us in the East Sea, and I'm here today to discuss how to cooperate with you. I'll help you take complete control of the Yu clan in Zhong Province, and you will cooperate with me to kill all of Yu Miao's family members, as well as all his henchmen. Are you willing to do that?" Right in front of Yu clan's mansion, in front of so many guards and private armies, Princess Zhonglu nonchalantly mentioned that she wanted to kill Yu Miao, the current great elder of Yu clan, and all his family members. Cold sweat broke out on Yu Miao's back. He hurriedly glanced around and gave his trusted subordinates a wink, then respectfully invited Princess Zhonglu into the mansion for a detailed discussion. Princess Zhonglu gladly accepted Yu Miao's invitation. Chapter 755. In the Great Hall of Yu clan, Yu Miao dared not to take his seat according to the position of the host and guest. Instead, he placed 2 long tables in a straight line so that Princess Zhonglu and himself could sit at the same level. The invisible majesty emanating from Princess Zhongli's divine soul had awed him, making every word and action of his become extremely cautious and respectful. Holding an exquisite jade teacup in her hand, Princess Zhonglu took a sip of the fragrant tea, then narrowed her eyes at Yu Miao and said in a deep voice, "Do you have any other opinion, clan leader? Join hands with me, kill Yu Miao, and seize the power of Yu clan. This is the cheapest thing we can do." Yu Miao grimaced, feeling very embarrassed. He wanted the power of Yu clan, and it was necessary for him to kill Yu Miao. But in the current situation, once Yu Miao killed Yu Miao, it would inevitably lead to a backlash from the elders around Yu Miao. It was a trivial matter to kill Yu Miao for the power of Yu clan, but it was not in his interest to kill a group of elders and purge a group of Yu clan members for the sake of power. On Pangu continent, the overall strength of a clan depended on the members of its clan to maintain itself. The death of Yu Miao and a group of his children and relatives would not cause too much damage to the overall strength of Yu clan in Zhong province, but the death of a group of elders, and about 70% of the members of Yu clan in Zhong province, could completely wipe out the Yu clan in Zhong province. Even if Yu Miao were to seize the power, what was the value of such a broken Yu clan? Princess Zhonglu stared coldly at Yu Miao with a slightly mocking smile on her face. Holding the teacup with both hands, she sipped the tea quietly, and let Yu Miao make the decision. She looked down on Yu Miao a little. He had been the clan leader of Yu clan in Zhong province for hundreds of years, but he still could not take complete control of this small clan. His means and ability were really lacking. If any of the ministers of Great Yan had Yu Miao's strength, and with the support of the Yu clan in Liangzhu, it would take them at most 10 years to put them in their place. Princess Zhonglu sighed silently as she placed the teacup on the table. Princess Zhonglu rose to her feet, nodded at Yu Miao, and said, "Since you haven't made up your mind, clan leader, let's just treat it as Zixian's empty visit today." Princess Zhonglu pursed her lips like a sharp knife and walked out of the hall with her head held high. Frowning, Yu Mu rose to his feet and said in a deep voice, "Please stay. This matter concerns the rise and fall of Yu clan in Zhong province, and I have to investigate it carefully." Princess Zhonglu gave him a sidelong glance, snorted softly, and continued walking out of the hall. Yu Mu was so angry that he wanted to slap the table and roar to vent his anger. But the enormous pressure brought by Princess Zhongli's divine soul had shaken his soul, and he no longer had the courage to shout at Princess Zhongli. Yu Mu felt that he had never felt so aggrieved in his life. Years ago, he was considered a genius among geniuses in the Yu clan in Liangzhu. After many rounds of selection, he came to Zhong province when the clan leader was in trouble, and with the help of the elders of the Yu clan in Liangzhu, he seized the power of the Yu clan in Zhong province. For hundreds of years, he had suppressed the elders of the Yu clan in Zhong province who were unwilling to give up, and kept using the power of the Yu clan in Zhong province to collect all kinds of resources to feed back to the Yu clan. It was especially so in the case of Feng Lingling. Following the will of his clan in Liangzhu, Yu Mu had betrayed Feng Lingling in one fell swoop. As a result, it had brought Yu clan in Zhong province to a new height. Yu Mu boasted that he was one of the most capable officials of Great Yu, but in front of Princess Zhonglu, she despised him so much. He could feel the deep contempt in Princess Zhongli's cold snort and sidelong glance. No one had ever dared to despise him, not even Yu Mu, his archenemy. But this woman surnamed Ji. Yu Mu's grievance and anger vanished again. Princess Zhongli's surname was Ji, and it was a surname he could not ignore. He bowed his head, clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. All right, I'll think about Princess Zhongli's request carefully. Should I cooperate with her and kill Yu Mu? Then, take complete control of the Yu clan? But how many members of the Yu clan will I have to kill? What will the other clans think of me if the notoriety of slaughtering my own people for the sake of power spreads out? It was true that the Yu clan in Liangzhu wanted him to take full control of the Yu clan in Zhong province, but would the elders in Liangzhu have a bad opinion of him if he seized the power by slaughtering his own people? Seeing that Princess Zhonglu had already walked to the door of the hall, Yu Mu, who was so upset that he almost threw his head back and howled. Why did everything go wrong today? Just now, there was such a big mess in the inner residence, and then the arrival of Princess Zhonglu had given him a big problem. Just as he was in a dilemma, Yu Mu's gloomy voice came through the door. Clan leader, I heard that you intend to join hands with a woman to kill me and take full control of the Yu clan? Ha ha ha, this is a plan that clan leader has been planning for many years, isn't it? Yu Mu's heart skipped a beat. What nonsense are you talking about, Yu Mu? He said with a cold snort. Princess Zhonglu stopped and stood proudly at the entrance, staring coldly at Yu Miao, who was hurrying over with a dozen elders of Yu clan. This was the first time Princess Zhonglu had seen Yu Mu with her own eyes. She twitched her mouth and snorted coldly. What a terrible old man. He has neither the looks nor the temperament. How can such a lowly thing be an elder of a clan? Secretly comparing him with those famous ministers of Great Yan, Princess Zhonglu found that Yu Mu really had nothing to boast about. He was nothing more than an old man with very poor morals and abilities, and because he was born into a good family, he had gained some power in Yu clan. If an old man like him were to stay in Great Yan's imperial court, it would not take him more than 3 to 5 years to be swallowed up by someone else. Yu Mu strode to the door, fixed his eyes on Princess Zhonglu and snapped. Are you that Ji Zixuan? Demoness, are you the woman of Tanlang, the Marquis of East Sea Province? Somebody, take her down. The furious Yu Mu sensed the spiritual pressure emanating from Princess Zhonglu, and when he approached Princess Zhonglu, He felt his heart palpitate. But Yu Miao was so furious that his blood was boiling. He was almost in a state of madness, so the pressure at the level of divine soul could not make him fear Princess Zhonglu as much as Yu Miao did. With the order, an elder standing behind Yu Mu, who looked like a bamboo pole, snorted coldly. Suddenly, his eyes popped out about a foot long, and out of them shot numerous wisps of black light, which transformed into a large fishing net and enveloped Princess Zhonglu. The net came with a frigid air, and wherever it passed, the air was frozen into white snowflakes. If one was caught by the net, even the immortal soul of an ordinary gold immortal would be frozen into ice cubes and captured by anyone. Princess Zhonglu just stood where she was, looking at the elder of Yu clan with a very proud expression. Just as the fishing net was about to touch Princess Zhonglu, it suddenly shattered into pieces, and the elder's bulging eyeballs exploded into countless pieces of ice. Blood sprayed out of his sunken eye sockets like a fountain. The elder let out a shrill howl as he rolled about on the ground with both hands covering his eye sockets. All his magic and divine abilities were focused on his eyeballs, and yet, Princess Zhonglu had destroyed them without batting an eyelid. All his cultivation base had gone down the drain. A five-colored divine ray shot out of the top of Princess Zhonglu's head, amidst which hovered the magnificent shrine inlaid with gold and jade. The avatar of the god of Scourge sat quietly in the shrine, looking down at Yu Mu and the others, who were dumbfounded. The primordial gods were the embodiment of the great Tao of heaven and earth. And they were the embodiment of the great Tao of heaven and earth. Attacking a god was equivalent to attacking the Tao directly, and one would be countered by the Tao. The first avatar Princess Zhonglu had condensed was the god of Scourge, the source of all calamities. When the elder attacked Princess Zhonglu, he was immediately attacked by the power of calamity. Although his eyeballs had countless magical abilities, they were still made of flesh and blood. Under the counterattack of the power of calamity, his eyeballs were shattered instantly. Princess Zhonglu did not even lift a finger, nor did she consume any magic power. She stood there like a mountain. If someone foolishly tried to hit a mountain with their head, they would naturally be smashed and bleed, but the mountain did not consume any energy at all. As soon as the avatar of the ancient god appeared, Yu Mu sucked in a breath and exclaimed in a low voice, "The bloodline of an ancient god? And she has condensed the avatar? How many years has it been since an almighty expert with a fully awakened bloodline of an ancient god appeared into you?" A strange gleam flickered in Yu Mu's eyes. He could not understand the meaning of a descendant of an ancient god who had fully awakened the bloodline of an ancient god. There was a temple of gods in every branch of the secret palace of Diyu, and its members were all descendants of the ancient gods who had awakened the bloodline of an ancient god in Diyu. But it seemed that even the first master of the Temple of Gods, the one with the strongest cultivation base in the whole Temple of Gods, had not condensed the golden body of an ancient god. Judging by the behavior of those crazy masters and elders of the secret palace, if they knew that there was an existence like Princess Zhonglu who had awakened the bloodline of an ancient god and condensed the golden body of an ancient god, they would most likely make Princess Zhonglu the master of the Temple of Gods. If I have the support of the master of the Temple of Gods, even if I kill Yu Mu and all of them. Yu Mu's eyes flickered as he stared at Yu Mu and the others with a deep killing intent. Yu Mu could sense the killing intent in Yu Mu's eyes. He gave him a cold look, then asked Princess Zhonglu through clenched teeth, "My children and the others?" Not allowing him to finish, Princess Zhonglu said bluntly, "I did it. What are you going to do about it? How dare you plot to seize my husband's territory? That is a capital crime. This empress has already sworn that you, your henchmen, and all your relatives will be slaughtered to the last. Not even a blade of grass will be left." Yu Miao was taken aback, then he roared furiously, "Kill them all? How arrogant of you!" Before his voice could fade away, the five-colored divine ray hovering over Princess Zhonglu's head transformed into 5 huge sword shadows, and came whistling down toward Yu Mu. The golden body of the god of Scourge let out a deep roar, and all kinds of plagues, viruses, venomous bugs, and wild beasts rushed out of it, drowning Yu Mu and the others in a flash. Yu Mu took a deep breath. Suddenly, he pulled out a broadsword that was shrouded in a ghostly aura, which was obviously crafted from the spine of some giant beast, and swung it silently at Yu Mu's chest. Yu Mu, how dare you try to murder me? You are unforgivable. You deserve to die 1,000 times for that. Guards. Yu Miao has gone mad and tried to assassinate me. Someone come and kill him as well. A monstrous killing intent towered into the sky from the Yu clan's mansion. Yu Mu, who represented the Yu clan in Liangzhu, and Yu Mu, who represented the Yu clan in Zhong province, had officially broken off their relationship. Chapter 756. Wu Qi had no idea what the furious Princess Zhang Lu had done in Zhong province. He was leading 378 strong heavenly ghosts and his soldiers to the lair of the primitive heavenly ghosts. The heavenly ghosts were running hard on the ground, while Wu Qi was riding on Ao Buzin and flying over their heads. A few miles behind them, the Jade Armor Mystic Turtle flying ship was moving slowly, surrounded by dark clouds and thick fog. A bone-chilling wind was blowing. In the outside world, this kind of wind, which was unique to the ghost realm, was enough to blow the immortal body and immortal soul of ordinary immortals into nothingness. But in the ghost realm, this kind of wind was blowing all the time, so the creatures here were much stronger than the creatures in the outside world. Even those who were only in the realm of nascent divinity had fleshly bodies that were strong enough to compete with heaven immortals who specialized in body tempering. As for the heavenly ghosts who were leading the way down below, they could run at this speed for 3 days and 3 nights in a row. If they were willing to spend a little of their energy essence, they could run at this speed for several hours at a speed 10 times faster. As for the mighty heavenly ghosts, they could run at this speed for 3 days and 3 nights as long as their stomachs were full. They could not travel through the void in the ghost realm, for where innate ghost energy filled the air, they could not. The only thing they could not do was travel through the void in the ghost realm, for where innate ghost energy filled the air, they could not drill through the void. But as long as they were summoned to the outside world, they could instinctively master the divine ability to travel through the void to attack the enemy. But relatively speaking, places filled with innate ghost energy were absolutely hopeless for ordinary immortals. Even ordinary gold immortals who strayed into the ghost realm could not fly through the innate ghost energy. The fact that the heavenly ghosts could run so fast here was a testament to their strength. It took these heavenly ghosts only 10 minutes to cover the distance of hundreds of miles. Ahead of them was a river that was hundreds of miles wide, and there was a rocky beach that stretched for thousands of miles. Jagged black reefs were piled up like the teeth of thousands of wild dogs. Among these reefs, some tall heavenly ghosts were madly colliding and fighting each other. From time to time, a powerful heavenly ghost would throw its companion to the ground, then excitedly grab the boulder next to it and hit its companion on the head. This was a very popular sport among the proto-sky ghosts. They would knock down their companions and smash their heads with boulders. The winner could enjoy the females and flesh to his heart's content, while the loser had to obediently hunt down and feed these powerful clansmen. There was a popular saying among the immortals in the outside world that the reason these primitive sky ghosts could develop intelligence after dozens of generations was because of this barbaric and bloody sport. By constantly being hit on the head by boulders, their brains would evolve, and their egg-sized brains would grow larger and larger, eventually making them smarter and smarter. It was a joke used by immortals to despise the heavenly ghosts, but Wu Qi couldn't help but agree with their actions. Those powerful heavenly ghosts beat the weak ones to their heart's content. And those weak ones were beaten to death every day. They had to find a way to defeat these powerful heavenly ghosts. When they could not defeat the enemy with physical strength, they could only use the power of intelligence to figure out a way to defeat them. Therefore, this had definitely accelerated the evolution of the proto-sky ghosts. In the huge rocky beach, thousands of heavenly ghosts were playing this game excitedly. More than 2,000 unlucky losers were pinned to the ground, and the victors were happily lifting boulders that were as wide as 100 feet and smashing them on the heads. The heads of these proto-sky ghosts were huge, at least as big as 2 or 3 water tanks, but their brains were only the size of eggs. Loud bangs rang out when the boulders hit their skulls, which were almost all bones, and sparks flew out from time to time. The scene of more than 2,000 heavenly ghosts being pinned to the ground and having their heads smashed by boulders looked very impressive, but it was also very funny. Wu Qi twitched his mouth and said nothing, but Huang Liang and the others in the jade armor mystic turtle flying ship were laughing so hard that their mouths were crooked. In the heart of the rocky beach, on a beach surrounded by black screen-shaped reefs, a group of young heavenly ghosts were feasting crazily. The longest of them was only about 30 feet long, which was about the age of a human child of 3 or 5 years old, while the smallest was only about a foot long, which meant that they had just been born. There was no such thing as respecting the old and loving the young among the proto-sky ghosts. The older heavenly ghosts were devouring the food crazily, and when a newborn heavenly ghost jumped up and took a few bites of the prey, the older ones would immediately beat and kick them. The 30-feet-long heavenly ghost was beating the 1-foot-long baby to its heart's content, just like a burly man beating a little hen. It was a funny and cruel scene, which made people speechless at the customs of the primitive heavenly ghosts. Next to these little heavenly ghosts, thousands of male heavenly ghosts were mating crazily with a smaller number of female heavenly ghosts. The huge bodies of these heavenly ghosts collided with each other, producing loud, dull noises as their hard bone armor and bone spurs collided with each other. And from time to time, dazzling sparks would shoot out. Occasionally, some heavenly ghosts moved too violently. Their long, powerful tails tore through the void like whips and struck other heavenly ghosts, often leaving behind bone-deep wounds. Some of the injured heavenly ghosts roared and jumped to their feet, and a fight broke out. But some heavenly ghosts were still clinging to the bodies of the female heavenly ghosts after being accidentally injured, trying their best to ram into them. This was the life of a proto-sky ghost. After eating and drinking, they would devote themselves to making the next generation. If nothing went wrong, they could lay 80 eggs at a time, and 80 offspring could be hatched at a time. As long as the proto-sky ghosts had enough nutrition, they could produce up to 3 eggs a year. In other words, a female proto-sky ghost could have 240 offspring in a year. It would only take them 10 years to reach adulthood, and then they could start reproducing. Therefore, if a pair of proto-sky ghosts, one male and one female, were thrown to an alien planet, it wouldn't take more than a few hundred years for the planet to be completely occupied by them. And all the living beings on the planet would become their food if there were no natural or man-made disasters. This was why the immortals forbade them from leaving the ghost realm at will. Even those who practiced the great art of heavenly ghosts rarely dared to let them reproduce in the outside world, for it would bring them great trouble. Among the thousands of heavenly ghosts who were reproducing, nearly 1,000 female heavenly ghosts were howling miserably. Clearly, they were not willing to do this. But the proto-sky ghosts pressing down on them were much stronger than them, and they could not resist at all. Amidst their shrill howls, the female proto-sky ghosts slammed into their bodies even more excitedly, tearing their skeletons apart and spraying out copious amounts of blood. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes. The eyes of these female heavenly ghosts flickered with the light of wisdom. They should be the clansmen of the heavenly ghosts in the valley, the unlucky ones who had been abducted by these primitive heavenly ghosts as breeding tools. The heavenly ghosts leading the way stopped, straightened up, and looked at Wu Qi eagerly. These hideous heavenly ghosts stared at Wu Qi with tears in their eyes, as if they were puppies that had been beaten by their owners. There was a hint of cuteness in their ferocious appearance. Wu Qi patted Ao Buzan's head, signaling him to lower his altitude. Wu Qi looked at the heavenly ghosts and nodded. I can help you save your people, and all the female heavenly ghosts in this group will belong to you. But in the future, you will be my vassals. You must obey all my orders. The heavenly ghosts exchanged a glance, then prostrated themselves respectfully on the ground. Unlike their ancestor, who was infatuated with love, they would not offend a veteran ghost saint for the sake of a lover. The rule of the ghost realm was that the strong were respected. With Wu Qi's formidable strength and his promise to help them save their people, it was only natural for them to submit to Wu Qi. With the promise of these heavenly ghosts, Wu Qi threw his head back and let out a long roar. The flying ship of the jade armor mystic turtle emerged from the dark clouds and mist. It slowly flew over and hovered over the rocky beach. The primitive heavenly ghosts, who were beating their own people and carrying out their breeding plan, looked up at the same time and let out long, violent roars. Some of them could not wait to throw the boulders in their hands into the sky. The heavy boulders flew a few miles high and smashed accurately on the hull of the flying ship. But the boulders could not cause any damage to the ship. The boulders fell back to the ground the same way they flew up, and the primitive heavenly ghosts who threw the boulders were still looking up at the sky stupidly. So, all the boulders smashed into their faces and knocked them down to the ground. Wuxia laughed, and so did Huang Liang and the others in the flying ship. 10,000 bone-piercing crossbows had locked onto the male primitive heavenly ghosts on the ground, and at Huang Liang's order, countless bolts shot out silently. Thousands of male primitive heavenly ghosts trembled and suddenly froze on the spot, unable to move. About a second later, tiny arrows of blood sprayed out of every male primitive heavenly ghost's body. Their internal organs were crushed by the powerful penetrating force of the arrows, and they were killed in an instant. The heavenly ghosts who had led Wuxia and his companions here let out joyful roars. After kowtowing to Wuxia, they immediately turned into afterimages and rushed toward the rocky beach. Roaring and talking at once, they rushed happily to the female heavenly ghosts who had been captured. The female primitive heavenly ghosts, who were having sex just now, stared blankly at their dead male clansmen. And when they saw the captured female heavenly ghosts happily hugging a group of strange males, these brainless female heavenly ghosts flew into a rage. Accompanied by shrill howls, thousands of female heavenly ghosts swooped down, intending to tear all the invading heavenly ghosts to pieces. Wuxia smiled coldly. The dark-een celestial tower flew out from the top of his head, unleashing countless streams of frigid star power that transformed into long, thick chains that bound all the heavenly ghosts. The hundreds of heavenly ghosts chattered with the captured female heavenly ghosts for a while, and then all of them knelt down before Wuxia at the same time. All the heavenly ghosts prostrated themselves on the ground, their tails sticking close to the ground. It was a sign of their complete submission. Chapter 757. After rescuing the captured female heavenly ghosts and harvesting over 3,000 female proto-heavenly ghosts, all the heavenly ghosts in the valley burst into wild cheers. Unlike the human race, except for those who had cultivated to the level of heavenly ghost king or ghost saint, the members of heavenly ghost tribes did not have any concept of chastity. Although more than half of the rescued clansmen were pregnant, for these heavenly ghosts, it was equivalent to obtaining a batch of strong descendants for free, which was beneficial to the development of the entire tribe. As for the 3,000 female proto-heavenly ghosts, they were a windfall. As long as they were provided with enough food and kept safe, they could quickly expand the population of the entire tribe. Generally speaking, it was an iron law in heavenly ghost tribes that females obeyed males. Therefore, as long as the wild nature of these proto-heavenly ghosts was worn down, they would naturally be obedient and become the mothers of the tribe. While the heavenly ghosts were dancing and jumping around excitedly, Wuxia was scanning the lair with his divine sense. Suddenly, he found something strange in the depths of the lair. His heart raced violently, and he rushed toward it in a hurry. Under a black screen-shaped reef, there was a cave about a mile in circumference. This cave was the residence of the original leader of the proto-heavenly ghost tribe, and it was filled with countless strange things that these proto-heavenly ghosts had plundered. There were glittering stones, wooden stakes that emanated strange energy waves, some strange dried grass roots, and some strange things of unknown origin. In short, these proto-heavenly ghosts were the strongest force within 10,000 miles. When they hunted and plundered other heavenly ghost tribes, they would always find some strange things, which were kept by their leader as the property of the tribe. It was in this mountainous pile of rubbish that Wuxia found many good things that made him excited. There were about 3,000 thumb-sized, translucent stones that were as dark as ink and bone-piercingly cold. They were ghost relics condensed from innate supreme energy, and a wisp of innate ghost energy. This thing had a similar origin to the Buddhist Saraira. It could only be condensed with the help of the body of the sky ghost, which was full of blood essence. The innate supreme energy and innate ghost energy merged into one, and after being swallowed into the stomachs of those powerful heavenly ghosts, they would absorb their blood essence and grow like parasites. These heavenly ghosts would gradually become thinner and withered, while these ghost relics would grow bigger and bigger. Ghost Sarira could contain almost unlimited spiritual power. It was the best material for refining all kinds of magic tools of the Devil Path and the Ghost Path. It was definitely the best material, not one of the best materials. There were more than 3,000 ghost relics here. Although the number was slightly small, it could definitely be used to refine a good spiritual offensive treasure. But what Wuxia wanted was not to refine the ghost relics into an artifact. The stones were born with extremely strong blood essence and mental power, and they were also the main ingredients for concocting the superior grade gold immortal pill, the 3 quartz 9 transformations energy replenishing pill. The so-called 3 quartz referred to the upper, middle, and lower dantians. The 9 transformations energy replenishing pill was a pill that could greatly fill the essence, replenish the innate and acquired energy essence, greatly increase the strength of an immortal's divine sense, strengthen the immortal soul, and greatly transform a person's cultivation constitution. Even if a pig ate the 3 quartz 9 transformations vitality replenishing pill, it would become the best cultivation genius. If the over 3,000 ghost relics were used well, he could concoct at least 1,000 3 quartz 9 revolutions energy replenishing pills. There were so many disciples in the underhand sect, and if he chose a batch of reliable disciples from them, and fed them with the pills, their cultivation progress would definitely be at least 100 times faster than ordinary immortals. After all, it was an superior grade gold immortal pill. The 3 quartz 9 transformations energy replenishing pill was regarded as a strategic pill in the celestial court. Except for the disciples of those great heavenly venerables, celestial emperors, and important immortal kings and celestial lords, no one could ever see what this pill looked like. Ghost relics were only produced in the ghost realm. If the celestial court wanted to get enough of them from the 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 400 ghost saints, it would have to pay an astonishing price. According to the memories Wuxia obtained from immortal Ding Jun's divine soul, he could only gather 3 furnaces of materials every 100 years to concoct hundreds of 3 quartz 9 transformations energy replenishing pills. The more than 3,000 ghost relics before him were basically equal to all the ghost relics the celestial court had obtained from the ghost realm in the past 200 years. After happily putting all the ghost relics into his interstitial world, Wuxia rummaged through the pile of rubbish and found a black wooden stick that looked like a dragon, about 100 feet long and shaped like a dragon. The wooden stick was twisted and wriggling, and its trunk was densely covered with horny things that looked like dragon scales. When Wuxia gently flicked it with his finger, the sound produced was like a dragon's roar, crisp and pleasant to the ear, but it contained a hint of evil aura that could make one's divine soul tremble. This was the dragon bone, which was rarely seen in the outside world. It was something similar to a fossil formed after a dead flood dragon fell into the ghost realm, and was immersed in the innate ghost energy day and night. The dragon bone could be used to craft items, but it was also a supreme grade ingredient for concocting spirit medicines. With just 1 dragon bone, he could concoct at least 3 to 5 cauldrons of yin and yang dragon bone strengthening pills. The body of a flood dragon was vigorous and yang, while the innate ghost energy was extremely yin and evil. Both of them had reached a perfect balance in the dragon bone, and after being concocted into a bone-strengthening pill, it would have a very strong beneficial effect on cultivators who practiced various body cultivation techniques. Basically, a single dragon bone strengthening pill could make a nascent divinity cultivator possess a fleshly body that was not weaker than an 18th tier heaven immortal, who specialized in body tempering. If it was combined with other medicinal ingredients, and the concoction technique was brilliant enough, a perfect dragon bone strengthening pill could make a nascent divinity cultivator possess the overall strength to fight against a peak stage heaven immortal, who was a body cultivator. Both Du and the celestial court produced this kind of pill in large quantities. But, as the dragon bone was very rare, only the imperial guards of the human emperor in Du could enjoy it. In the celestial court, only the heavenly soldiers under the direct command of the great heavenly lord of the celestial court had the luck to be rewarded with this spirit pill. Similarly, the dragon bone could only be produced in the ghost realm. In order to obtain enough dragon bone, both Du and the celestial court had to make deals with the local tyrants in the ghost realm. At the same time, In order to maintain the continuous production of dragon bone, every year, a batch of demon cultivators who had just transformed into flood dragons would be secretly killed and thrown into the ghost realm. After tens of thousands of years, the corpses of these demon cultivators would turn into dragon bone. Do you had a special dragon raising pond for breeding flood dragon demon cultivators? Given the attitude of Du toward demon cultivators, it was understandable for them to do so. As the nominal authority in charge of all the immortals in the world, the celestial court dared not do so openly. But in the cave abodes of some infamous celestial lords and celestial lords under the celestial court, they kept a large number of sealed flood dragons. When their cultivation base reached a certain level, these flood dragons would be slaughtered and sent into the ghost realm. Wuxia put the dragon bone into his pouch. This 100-feet-long dragon bone could be used to concoct about 300 bone-strengthening pills, which was enough for Wuxia to cultivate a batch of elites for the East Sea province. After all, it was against the harmony of heaven to exchange blood sacrifices for power from Lei Meng all the time. Secondly, where could Wuxia find so many immortals to sacrifice? After all, the myriad immortal alliance had been destroyed. Could Wuxia still go to outer heavenly realms to abduct immortals and itinerant cultivators? Happily, Wuxia continued to rummage through the pile of rubbish, and before long, he had found over 30 kinds of unbreakable treasures from this small hill of rubbish. Wuxia was not interested in the materials produced in the ghost realm. After all, the materials produced in the ghost realm were most suitable for immortals who practiced the ghost Tao. Moreover, Wuxia did not have the cultivation technique of ghost Tao, so it was useless even if he obtained them. However, all kinds of alchemy materials produced in the ghost realm were of the best quality, especially many of which could only be produced in the ghost realm of the ninth nether. The great heavenly ghost kings and ghost saints of the ghost realm were very strict about the sale of these materials. Some spirit pills that could only be refined with the specialty products of the ghost realm were very difficult to find in the outside world. And because of the characteristics of the innate ghost energy, the spirit pills refined from the materials produced in the ghost realm could either enhance the strength of the divine soul, or temper the fleshly body, strengthening the fleshly body rapidly. These two effects were very tempting to both the celestial court and Du. Therefore, these materials produced in the ghost realm were very rare in the outside world, and ordinary people had never even heard of the names of these materials and their corresponding spirit pills. It was already a pleasant surprise for Wuxia that he could find dozens of materials that could be used for concocting pills in the rubbish of this former heavenly ghost tribe. In the next few days, Wuxia directed these heavenly ghosts who had submitted to him to travel around, scraping the land within a radius of 10,000 miles, and obtaining many materials of good quality. These natural treasures were useless to these heavenly ghosts, but to Wuxia and the immortals in the outside world, each of them was a rare treasure. As the harvest increased, Wuxia became more and more excited. For a moment, he forgot the problem of looking for a passage to leave the ghost realm, and concentrated on collecting all kinds of rare treasures in the outside world. Huang Liang and the others did not dare to disturb Wuxia, although they did not know why Wuxia collected so many materials that looked no different from rubbish, who dared to object to Wuqi's action. Just as Wuxia was about to expand the area of scraping tens of thousands of miles, the river near the valley where the heavenly ghosts lived suddenly changed. The sticky yellow water of the river tumbled up into the sky, and shrill howls kept coming from the upper reaches of the river. A terrible and solemn aura came sweeping over, and the shrill howls made people's ears hurt and their vision blacked out. Huang Liang and the others fainted immediately, and the heavenly ghosts dropped to their knees in fear. Amidst Wuqi's horrified gaze, a shabby dragon boat slowly rose from the river several hundred miles away. A burly man clad in a crimson robe was standing on the prow of the boat, giving off an awe-inspiring air as he let out an eerie howl. At the same time, the man also noticed Wuxia, who was looking at him from hundreds of miles away. He gave a deep roar, and the dragon boat quickly flew towards Wuxia. Monstrous killing intent continued to surge. The burly man slowly raised the horse-slaying sword in his hand, which was about 10 feet long. Chapter 758. The dragon boat in front of him was tall and ancient-looking, entirely green in color, as if it was carved out of a piece of wood that was 1,000 feet long and hundreds of feet wide. The dragon boat, which had originally been exquisitely carved, was now riddled with dozens of holes of varying sizes. The dragon head was missing in half, and the dragon tail was completely broken off. The roof of the cabin in the middle of the dragon boat had also been blown off, revealing the tables and praying mats and other items inside. However, all of the items were almost completely rotten. The man standing at the bow of the ship was 9 feet tall. His crimson robe was basically intact, but there was a very thin mark on his chest. Clearly, some kind of attack had pierced through this robe, which was embroidered with dozens of fire crows flying in the air. As for the man's body and face, Wuxia only gave him a glance, then immediately turned his head away. All that was left of the man was a golden-purple skeleton. The dense innate ghost energy and some kind of unknown energy merged together, covering his skeleton with a layer of translucent muscles, barely forming a blurry facial features. In his deep dark eye sockets, 2 faint red lights flashed, filled with an air of brutality and madness. This was not a man, but an ancient immortal who had fallen in the ghost realm many years ago, and had been infected by innate ghost energy and turned into a ghost. The 13 great heavenly ghost kings of the ghost realm had the same origin as him. They were all ancient almighty experts who had fallen, and after being soaked in innate ghost energy for countless eons, they had evolved into ghost bodies. As for the 400 ghost saints, more than half of them had the same origin, and only a small portion of them were ghost saints who were born and bred in the heavenly ghost realm. Accompanied by a fierce murderous aura, the dragon boat came before Wuxia in a flash, slashing down toward Wuxia with a long, serrated sword. Wuxia snorted coldly. With a flick of his sleeve, he dodged the slash of the sword like a loach. With a wave of his right hand, the flying ship was sucked into his interstitial world by a beam of chaotic light that shot out of his palm. At the same time, a deafening rumble rang out from his interstitial world, causing Huang Liang and the others to fall into a deep coma. Then, he cast a soul-shaking curse on each of them, preventing them from waking up naturally for at least a month. After packing up Huang Liang and his companions, Wuxia gently waved his fingers and sent all the members of Heavenly Ghost Clan he had subdued into his interstitial world. Just like Huang Liang and the others, before they entered the interstitial world, all the heavenly ghosts were knocked out by him, and each of them was given a soul-shaking spell. The sword brushed past Wuxia's body, its edge tearing through the air, and bringing up a cold breeze. The robe Wuxia was wearing was just an ordinary one, so when the sword swept across it, his clothes were ripped to shreds in an instant, revealing his strong, tanned and youthful body. The red gleam in the ancient immortal's eyes grew even brighter. With great difficulty, he opened his mouth and growled in a low voice, "Blood, meat, eat!" The sword gleamed coldly, and the dragon boat drew a large circle in the air, then came smashing down toward Wuxia. Wuxia snorted coldly and locked his hands into an incantation gesture. Immediately, the surrounding innate ghost energy surged over and condensed into a thunderbolt in his palm. Then he casually released the thunderbolt, which was the size of a wicker basket, and shot toward the dragon boat at top speed, trailing a long trail of black smoke behind it. A deep, muffled boom rang out, and the dragon boat, which was already completely decayed, shattered to pieces. The ancient immortal, who had no consciousness to protect himself, was thrown dozens of miles away by the thunderbolt. The horse-slaying sword in his hand spun rapidly and flew out of his hand. After flying for over 100 miles, it easily stabbed into a towering mountain like a hot knife through butter. Wuxia was taken aback. The horse-slaying sword was ridiculously long, and its shape was very strange. It looked like a red, twisted centipede with serrated teeth. Despite its ugly shape, it was so sharp, and it did not emit any energy fluctuation. Obviously, it was also a rare and extraordinary treasure. Without saying a word, Wuxia sped towards the place where the sword fell. With a blink of his body, he came to the side of the lofty mountain and gave it a heavy punch. A loud boom rang out as half of the mountain was blown to pieces. The horse-slaying sword, which was shaped like a centipede and covered with serrated teeth, was twisting and leaping among the rocks like a living creature. about to soar into the sky. Without saying a word, Wuqi punched the hilt of the sword, then casually formed 36 sealing runes and branded them on the sword. Amidst a sonorous sword cry, the sealing runes Wuqi had formed in a hurry were torn to pieces by a casual shake of the sword. An incredibly fierce sword intent swept out from a slanted angle, cutting a fine line of blood on Wuqi's hand. Blood dripped down from his hand. Instead of feeling angry, Wuqi was overjoyed, and he burst into a loud laughter. As he had cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture, dragon transformation script, and dragon kill, the strength of his fleshly body had reached an incredible level. Although he was only a peak level 5th tier gold immortal, the actual strength of his fleshly body was comparable to an ordinary 2nd tier gold immortal, who specialized in body tempering. The sword was not controlled by anyone, and it was able to hurt his fleshly body with just a wisp of sword intent. Clearly, it was an extremely rare ancient artifact. Come to think of it, all the immortals who had fallen on this fragment of Pangu continent, which eventually evolved into the Ghost Realm, were famous figures in the ancient times. If they were not the supreme almighty experts of that time, they would not have been able to shatter Pangu continent, and eventually let a huge fragment drift into the outer heavenly realms, where it eventually merged with the first wisp of innate ghost energy after the primal chaos was created, and evolved into the Ghost Realm. Furthermore, after going through countless eons, they still retain their spirituality, and after being nourished by the innate ghost energy, they could transform into ghost bodies and be reborn again. Furthermore, they were the ones with the highest cultivation base among them, so how could their weapons be weak? It was said that the more powerful the ancient experts who had fallen in the 9th Nether Ghost Realm were, the later they would be reborn. Just like the 13 great heavenly ghost kings, the few with the strongest cultivation were the last to be reborn as ghosts from the state of corpses. In other words, the ancient immortal Wuqi had met was stronger than the 13 great heavenly ghost kings when they were alive, and his overall strength would definitely surpass them in the future. Wonderful! Are you here to give me a treasure? Wuqi roared with laughter. His fingers moved rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, 3,600 restrictive runes poured out like a stream of water. The dark Een celestial tower flashed over his head, and the horse-slaying sword also disappeared without a trace. He had used the celestial array inside the dark Een celestial tower, and the 3,600 restraining runes to suppress this oddly shaped sword. No matter how powerful it was, under the suppression of the law of time, it could no longer do anything. When Wuqi had the time, he would refine it. Such a sharp treasure was extremely rare, and it could cut Wuqi's fleshly body. In other words, it could easily tear apart an upper-grade gold immortal artifact. What kind of power did it have? Wuqi was laughing so hard that his mouth was crooked. Just as he was feeling proud of himself, a great force came at him from behind. The ancient immortal had pounced at Wuqi from behind, pounced on Wuqi like a country bumpkin, and opened his mouth to bite Wuqi's neck. Wuqi was taken aback. Hastily, he grabbed the man's neck with a backhand and pulled him off from behind, throwing him heavily to the ground. Wuqi had used all his strength in this attack. The brute force he had now was enough to crush a star, and coupled with the magical power in his body, the divine power was even more earth-shattering. The ancient immortal gave a muffled snort, and his robe was torn to shreds by the huge shockwave. He hit the ground like a meteor, causing the ground around him to tremble violently. Large tracts of rocks were twisted and shattered by the shockwave, and the hills and ridges within 1,000 miles were dislocated and shattered. The power of Wuqi's attack was so great that it had caused great damage to this part of the world. But, the immortal sprung to his feet as if nothing had happened to him. He spread his arms and rushed toward Wuqi, roaring at the top of his lungs. Like a madman, he threw his arms around Wuqi, his eyes flickering with a red flame, while waves of complicated and messy spiritual energy rushed toward Wuqi. Carefully, Wuqi dodged the immortal's attacks and knocked him to the ground again and again. At the same time, he carefully received the psychic waves from the immortal, and from them he figured out the man's background. This ancient immortal had been reborn and awakened 300 years ago, but his intelligence had dissipated. He was like a real proto-sky ghost, acting purely on instinct. For the past 300 years, he had wandered around this region millions of miles in circumference, hunting prey that he was interested in. He was not very interested in those sky ghosts and primitive sky ghosts, so he did not attack the natives of the ghost realm. What he liked most was the flesh and blood of living creatures. Over the past 300 years, he had killed some immortals who came to the ghost realm for some unknown reason, and sucked all their blood essence dry. These days, he was drifting casually in the river when he smelled the rich aroma of flesh and blood emanating from Wuxia, Huangliang, and the others. That was why he hurried here to have a feast. What kind of nose is that? How can you smell us from hundreds of miles away? Annoyed, Wuxia grabbed the immortal's head and punched it dozens of times with all his strength. Amidst the deafening noise, the layer of translucent flesh and blood on the immortal's skin was smashed to pieces. But his purple-gold skeleton was so strong that even though Wuxia had exhausted all his strength, he could not leave even a mark on it. After all, the immortal's skeleton had been nourished by innate ghost energy for countless eons, making it as strong as the fleshly body of a primordial expert. How could the current Wuxia hurt him? Fortunately, the immortal's intelligence had not recovered yet, and he could only act based on his instincts. When he gradually recalled the divine abilities and spells he had cultivated in the past from the marks on his body, and when he gradually learned how to absorb innate ghost energy to cultivate himself, Wuxia would have to flee for his life whenever he saw him, and would not be able to beat him as casually as he did today. There was no other way to deal with the ancient immortal's body. Flustered and exasperated, Wuxia sprayed out a large sheet of purple-green flame from his palms, burning the immortal's skull. The divine flame of order was specialized in destroying all kinds of evil things, fiends, ghosts, and other pure spiritual creatures. However, when Wuxia sprayed out the divine flame of order, it immediately produced an unexpected and miraculous effect. The red flame in the ancient immortal's eyes was abruptly burned away by the divine flame of order. The immortal let out a shrill howl and fell heavily to the ground. As an ancient immortal who had just woken up 300 years ago, his poor divine sense was burned away by Wuxia with the divine flame of order. Wuxia looked at the purple-gold skeleton lying on the ground in horror. Suddenly, he let out a loud laugh, grabbed the skeleton, spun, and left. The ghost realm was indeed a place where one could make a fortune. Chapter 759. The Inferno Hellfiend flame was rolling and rocking in Wuxia's palm, producing deep, deep fiend howls that could shake one's soul. Even the rocks around the cave were trembling slightly. After obtaining the ancient immortal's remains and the sword, Wuxia immediately kept all the heavenly ghosts who had submitted to him into his interstitial world. After that, he hurriedly found the cave to receive the legacy of the ancient immortal. The 10 feet long, palm-wide and paper-thin blood-red, centipede-shaped horse-slaying sword was rolling and rocking in the fiend flame. 90% of Wuxia's mind was focused on this ball of fiend flame, constantly injecting wisp after wisp into the sword, breaking through the restrictive spells of nascent divinity, and branding his divine will into the complicated restrictive spells in the sword. Perhaps because it had been penetrated by the innate ghost energy for countless eons, this centipede-shaped sword, which was supposed to be an immortal weapon, had been transformed into a ghost weapon of the evil path. Wuxia did not have the cultivation technique of ghost cultivators, so he could not refine the sword with the most suitable technique. However, as he was cultivating the Inferno Hellfiend scripture, he could use the Inferno Hellfiend flame to refine the sword. Furthermore, the complicated and powerful restrictive spells in the sword were all recorded in the Scroll of Stealing. Different from the formations and restrictive spells that were commonly used by immortals to refine flying swords and magical treasures, this sword was forged in the primordial era, the same era as all the formations and restrictive spells in the Scroll of Stealing. Therefore, Wuxia was able to easily break through all the restrictive spells, branding his divine will into the sword. When the last restrictive spell was broken, Wuxia separated a thread of divine will and left it in the sword. Abruptly, the 10 feet long blood-red sword transformed into a tiny centipede, less than 3 inches long. Like a living creature, it slithered and crawled all over Wuxia's body, letting out deep buzzing noises from time to time. The tiny centipede shone with a bright light. Even with Wu Qi's cultivation base, when he cast a glance at it, the bright light made him feel a sharp pain in his eyes. What a treasure! Ao Buzan lay on Wu Qi's head, his head hanging between Wu Qi's brows as he stared at the little centipede and said, "In ancient times, magical treasures were divided into 3 grades: supreme treasures of primal chaos, spirit treasures of chaos, and innate spirit artifacts. This is clearly an innate spirit artifact. TSK, even for the primordial immortals of today, it is extremely difficult for them to gather the materials to forge an innate spirit artifact." Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment. The Scroll of Stealing had also mentioned about the classification of these 3 extraordinary treasures in the ancient times. Grandmist treasures were spiritual treasures formed in the boundless Grandmist before the great Saint Pangu created the world. The myriad manifestations star core that Wu Qi had obtained was also a Grandmist treasure. Chaos spiritual treasures were powerful treasures that were born when Pangu created the world. Grandmist's spiritual energy fluctuated violently, triggering the laws of heaven and earth. Each of these treasures had the power to destroy heaven and earth, but in terms of magic, they were inferior to Grandmist's spiritual treasures. As for innate spirit artifacts, they were spirit weapons forged by powerful innate beings who had gathered all kinds of innate essences, and gathered the primordial energy 1 aeon after Pangu created the world. Most of these spirit weapons were forged with some kind of powerful innate beings, just like the centipede-shaped sword in Wu Qi's hand. It was a treasure carefully forged with a centipede-like innate being as a cauldron and countless innate essences. This kind of spirit weapon was born with a spirit, and its sentience was extremely strong. Although it was not like the immortal artifacts forged by immortal cultivators, whose spirits could cultivate to become immortals, in terms of pure lethality, these spirit weapons were much stronger than most of the primordial immortal weapons of today. After countless apocalypses of heaven and earth, countless almighty experts had fallen since ancient times. Even if those primordial immortals had the method to forge innate spirit artifacts, they could not find a good innate being as a cauldron, and they could not gather so many innate essences as raw materials. Therefore, even though they knew that innate spirit artifacts were stronger than their primordial immortal weapons in terms of lethality, very few primordial immortals could forge an innate spirit artifact. "I'm rich." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. "I'm rich." Ao Buzan shook his head and said with emotion, "In order to forge a primordial immortal weapon, those primordial immortals had to work hard for countless eons, feeding the item spirit inside with their own blood essence. I wonder how many tribulations they had to go through to forge a primordial immortal weapon successfully. Master, I can't believe you've obtained an innate spirit artifact so easily, and the owner of this treasure is dead and has almost no control over it. So it didn't take you much effort to get it." Wu Qi looked gladly at the little blood-red centipede crawling on his shoulder, and said with a smile, "Yes, I've struck it big this time. Fortune comes from danger, and the ancients did not deceive me. Well, I'll just call it Blood Centipede Sword." Wu Qi had given the sword a new name, and it was filled with sentience. Immediately, wisps of blood-red gleam burst out from the sword, and the razor-sharp sword intent sliced the cave where Wu Qi was hiding in. Large chunks of rocks kept falling down from the cave. Wu Qi and Ao Buzan could not help but look at each other in astonishment. The killing intent emanating from this treasure was very fierce. When it was forged, it must have used countless supreme-grade materials that carried the innate killing intent. After marveling for a while, Wu Qi swallowed the blood centipede sword, and let it swim back and forth in his veins, gradually nourishing it with his own blood essence. This kind of innate spirit artifact was different from the flying swords that immortals were accustomed to using nowadays. It had to be nourished with one's own blood essence, just like feeding a pet. The more blood essence it consumed, the more compatible it would be with the user, and the more powerful it would be. As for the flying swords and magic treasures used by immortals nowadays, unless they were natal magic treasures refined by immortals of the evil path, they only needed to be nourished with energy essence. As he felt the blood centipede sword gradually absorb his blood essence, Wu Qi took a deep breath and threw out the ancient immortal's corpse. This ancient immortal's body had been nourished and tempered by innate ghost energy for countless years. The layer of translucent flesh on the surface was actually the condensation of excess ghost energy. Although it had some defensive power, it was really useless compared to the skeleton of his true form. As he stroked the corpse, a large sheet of heavenly phoenix flame burst out of Wuxi's palm and burned away the translucent flesh. An unpleasant stench of rotting corpses rose into the sky. All that was left of the ancient immortal's body was this strong skeleton, which had been tempered and polished to the point of being extremely strong. Even if Wuxi tried his best, he could not leave a mark on it. He cast his divine sense into the skeleton. The purple gold skeleton was so dense that not even Wuxi's divine sense could penetrate it. Instead, it was repelled by a layer of soft runes on the surface of the skeleton, which nearly shattered Wuxi's divine sense. He tapped the skeleton with his finger, producing a crisp sound that sounded like the ringing of gold and jade. Wuxi weighed the skeleton in his hand. The 9-foot-tall skeleton weighed hundreds of billions of kilograms, which was heavier than several mountains. This showed how dense the skeleton was. Gasping in shock, Wuxi shook his head and said, "This treasure is not worth it if I use it to craft items." Ao Buzan suddenly poked his head out, opened his mouth, and gave the skeleton a big bite on its shoulder blade. A loud cracking noise rang out, and sparks flew in all directions. Ao Buzan howled miserably, holding his bleeding gums and retreating back into Wuxi's hair. He roared furiously, "I can't craft items, and I can't eat it either. I'll just pour a puddle of urine on it, and let it go down in history." Wuxi shook his head. He pondered for a brief moment, then the Stealing the Sky script, from the 7 foundation elevating technique found in Scroll of Stealing emerged in his mind. This Chi Stealing heavenly script should be the culmination of all the stealing techniques found in Scroll of Stealing. It contained countless magical techniques, and basically, it had reached the point where it could steal anything. It seemed that it was time for him to start cultivating this Stealing the Sky script. There was a divine ability in it called Stealing the Bone Exchanging Technique, and it just so happened that he could use this skeleton. The suggestion in the Stealing Heaven art for this bone-changing technique was that it was best to choose the golden body remains of an ancient Buddha to cultivate this technique. This cultivation technique could gradually extract the incomparably tyrannical bone essence of the ancient Buddha's remains and gradually refine it into one's own body. The more ancient Buddha's golden bodies used, the faster the cultivation speed would be, and the greater the benefits would be. According to the description in the bone exchanging technique, there was basically no limit to this technique. However many ancient Buddhas Wuxi could obtain, he could fuse all the bone essence into his own bones. If he could fuse a few ancient Buddha's golden bodies, his bones would truly be indestructible. Once the bones were strong, the marrow would be strong as well, and the internal organs, meridians, and blood would undergo a transformation. This was a technique that could strengthen the fleshly body from the root. Furthermore, by using the bone exchanging technique to strengthen one's bones, it was much faster than cultivating by oneself. According to the bone exchanging technique, as long as one had the cultivation base of a heaven immortal, one could completely digest and absorb an ancient Buddha's golden body in just 100 years. But now that Wuxi had the cultivation base of a gold immortal, Wuxi reckoned that perhaps it would only take him a few years to completely assimilate the skeleton in front of him. After a moment of silence, Wuxi cupped his fist and bowed to the purple gold skeleton, then said, "Senior." But before he could finish his sentence, Wuxi suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "What are you talking about? Your soul has already perished, and the little bit of consciousness that you had just regrown has been destroyed by me. Do you really think you can understand what I'm talking about?" Sneering, Wuxi opened his mouth, and a chaotic beam of light rushed out, instantly swallowing the purple gold skeleton into his belly. In his interstitial world, countless chaotic energies followed Wuxi's will and condensed into a huge cauldron. Then he placed the skeleton in it and slowly burned it. Wuxi's natal blood essence was used as firewood, emitting a crimson flame in the cauldron, while Wuxi's natal flame condensed into strange runes, gradually burning the purple gold skeleton. Gradually, tiny purple gold particles drifted out of the skeleton. After being purified and refined by the cauldron condensed from chaotic energies, They flew out of the interstitial world and sank into Wuqi's bones. Suddenly, tiny beads of sweat broke out from Wuqi's body, and his bones felt hot. Torrential streams of heat kept flowing back and forth in his bone marrow, giving him an indescribable pleasure that nearly made him scream out loud. The sky-stealing bone-changing technique was indeed marvelous. A bright light shone from Wuqi's eyes. Just as he was about to let out a joyful roar, a deep, violent dragon roar suddenly came from his body. The soul of Taotai, which he had absorbed, suddenly transformed into a beam of light and dove into the huge cauldron. It gripped the lid tightly with its 4 feet, while a blinding blood-red flame burst out from its body. The soul of Taotai proactively helped Wuqi absorb and refine the skeleton. With the help of the innate devouring power of Taotai, Wuqi's speed of refining the skeleton was increased by 100 times. Wuqi was struck with a wild joy. He did a quick calculation and found that in at most 1 month, he would be able to completely refine this skeleton. The soul of Taotai was so miraculous that Wuqi threw his head back and roared excitedly. His roar shook the surrounding caves, causing them to rumble and collapse. Chapter 760. As he sensed the gradual changes in his bones, Wuqi could not help but burst into laughter. As a gold immortal, every move he made was enough to destroy heaven and earth. Wuqi laughed heartily. His roar was as loud as thunder, and the sound waves overlapped and turned into a terrible energy shockwave that swept out in all directions. The cave he was hiding in was near the foot of a 10,000 miles tall mountain. Now as he laughed out loud, the 10,000 miles tall mountain above him suddenly collapsed, and the huge mountain was instantly shattered into countless pieces, scattering in all directions. His laughter rolled and swept in all directions, uprooting the nearby hills and ridges. Thick rock layers twisted and cracked amidst the white sound waves, and tens of miles thick rock layers were forcibly scraped up. Hundreds of miles in circumference, rock layers flew up into the air amidst a grating noise. Vibrated by the sound waves, the twisted rock layers were instantly shattered into pieces. Large and small broken rocks darted out in all directions, bringing up countless white airwaves in the air. Wuqi's laughter had caused a destructive change to the terrain within thousands of miles. With him as the center, a crater more than 300 miles deep appeared out of nowhere. The inside of the crater, thousands of miles in diameter, was as smooth as a mirror, and the sound waves produced by Wuqi's laughter had polished the inside of the crater so smooth that even a fly could not stand still. Thousands of miles away, a great river that was hundreds of miles wide was also affected by the laughter. The river water was pushed up into the sky by the laughter, and in the river, countless ferocious-looking large fishes and aquatic beasts exploded into pieces. All kinds of blood dyed the yellow river water colorful and dazzling. The laughter lasted for a full quarter of an hour before it stopped. When Wuqi stopped, he could not help but look around in horror. He had just laughed to his heart's content, but it had caused such a destructive effect. Was this the power of a gold immortal? The rocks and sand in the ghost realm were soaked in ghost energy, making them as hard as ordinary heaven immortal artifacts. Even if an ordinary peak-level heaven immortal came to the ghost realm and exhausted all his immortal energy, he could only create a crater thousands of feet in diameter in the ground. Yet, Wuqi's laughter could create a crater thousands of miles in diameter. With his cultivation base as a 5th-tier gold immortal, it would be shocking if it got out. Shaking his head, Wuqi patted Ao Buzin, who was lying on his head and had been dazed by his laughter. "The power of a gold immortal is so strong," he said in a low voice. "I'll have to be careful in the future. No wonder you forbade those powerful immortals to enter Pangu continent." TSK. If that gold immortal were to go to a city and laugh, wouldn't he kill all the people in it? Ao Buzin stuck his tongue out, his saliva dripping onto Wuqi's hair. The saliva was quickly absorbed by Wuqi's hair, so much so that Wuqi's hair became glossy and had a faint fragrance. "Isn't that right?" Ao Buzin murmured. Years ago, when Lao Tzu peeped at White Emperor's daughter bathing in his palace, he killed thousands of White Emperor's personal guards with a dragon roar. While Ao Buzin was bragging about his glorious past, a dark cloud, about 100 miles in circumference, suddenly appeared out of thin air in the distant sky. Accompanied by a chilly wind, the dark cloud rolled and flew toward Wuxia. With Wuqi's eyesight, he could see two men standing on the dark cloud from a distance of over 1,000 miles. Each of them was clad in a long black robe and had a small black conical hat on their head. One of them was holding a black iron medallion, while the other was holding a black iron chain. The two men's faces were pale, and a chilly wind was blowing around them. From time to time, white flames would burst out of their bodies and turn into ghostly shadows dancing in the air behind them. Their eyes were ablaze with an eerie green flame, which was tens of feet long and gave off a bone-piercing cold light. The green flame illuminated the area within 1,000 feet around them, giving them an eerie aura. As he carefully scanned the two strangely dressed men with his divine sense, Wuqi's heart skipped a beat. The two men looked thin and frail, as if they could be blown away by a gust of wind, but the ghost energy in their bodies was vast and unfathomable. Their cultivation bases and realms were actually several levels higher than Wuqi's. At least, Wuxia could not see through their cultivation bases. But the pressure they gave Wuxia was not as strong as that of the sovereign and Prabhudaratna Buddha. In other words, they had not reached the realm of primordial immortals, but were two extremely powerful gold immortals. This was the ghost realm, where the world was filled with rich ghost energy and all kinds of evil energy. The natural energy and the energies of the 5 elements that immortal cultivators could control did not exist here. If ordinary immortals entered the ghost realm, their cultivation bases would be suppressed to less than 1/10 of their original strength. On the other hand, the cultivation bases of ghost immortals and heavenly ghosts would become extremely strong. Ghost immortals of heaven immortal realm could unleash the prowess of gold immortals in the ghost realm, and ghost immortals and heavenly ghosts of peak gold immortal realm could fight against primordial immortals. Therefore Wuqi's face turned very serious. His chaotic energy could also absorb the ghost energy and all kinds of evil energy from the outside world and turn them into his own, but he was not familiar with the means of ghost cultivators, which made him innately weak when fighting with others in the ghost realm. And these two powerful ghost immortals in front of him could be strengthened by the ghost realm. Without even fighting, Wuxia knew that he was no match for them. He could only hope that they were not here to cause him trouble. Wuxia slowly flew up into the sky, hovering in midair on a dark cloud. For a gold immortal, a distance of 1,000 miles was no different from standing face to face with an ordinary person. Wuxia did not want to turn around and flee without asking the purpose of their visit. Soon, the dark cloud was less than 10 miles away from Wuxia, and only then did it slow down and finally approach about a mile away. The two black-robed men squinted at Wuxia. The dark cloud behind them rolled and rolled, and then dozens of shadows darted out of it at high speed, baring their teeth and staring at Wuxia. The two black-robed men were obviously ghost immortals who had become human cultivators, and the dozens of shadows darting out of their backs were obviously powerful heavenly ghosts. Unlike the heavenly ghosts in the valley Wuxia had subdued, the dozens of heavenly ghosts in front of him had very high cultivation bases, so their appearance had been transformed to be similar to that of a human being. They were all handsome men and beautiful women who looked no different from humans. If it had not been for the row of sharp bone spikes growing out of the back of their heads, and the long shiny tail wrapped around their waists like a belt, Wuxia would not have been able to distinguish them from ordinary humans. Compared with the ordinary heavenly ghosts who looked like monsters, these heavenly ghosts had the cultivation base of gold immortals, which allowed them to reconstruct their fleshly bodies, and possessed higher intelligence, which made them no different from ordinary immortals. Only those heavenly ghosts who had reached the realm of gold immortals could restrain the greed and desire in their nature. Even the tribe of heavenly ghosts in the valley that Wuxia had subdued could barely maintain their intelligence in the ghost realm. But if they were allowed to go to Panga continent, when they smelled the fragrance of flesh and blood of humans and other living beings, they would be unable to control their instincts and kill and devour them. The dozens of high-grade heavenly ghosts fixed their eyes on Wuxia. The man with the medallion among the two black-robed men suddenly asked, "Fellow immortal, have you seen a dark green dragon boat passing by? A few days ago, we sensed his presence in the vicinity, but his aura quickly dissipated. I wonder if fellow immortal has seen him?" Wuxia was slightly taken aback. Did these two men bring so many high-grade heavenly ghosts just to find the ancient immortal whom Wuxia had subdued? Looking down at the huge crater his laughter had created, Wuxia smiled, cupped his fist, and said, "Greetings, fellow immortals. This humble Taoist has never seen the person the two fellow immortals spoke of." The two black-robed men exchanged a glance, their eyes flickering for a moment. It was obvious that they had suddenly become a lot more dispirited. The man with the iron chain snorted coldly. Glancing at the huge crater on the ground, he said coldly, "Since you haven't seen him, let's forget about it. Well, do you have a travel document issued by the 13 great heavenly ghost kings or the 400 ghost saints? If you do, please show it to me." A travel document issued by the heavenly ghost kings and ghost saints? What the hell is that? Wuxia stared blankly at the two men. Their expressions changed abruptly, and a green beam shot out from their eyes, stretching for hundreds of feet. The man holding the token shouted sternly, "Who are you, immortal? How did you sneak into the ghost realm? We are the special envoys of Great Yu's Hunda Ghost King, who are responsible for patrolling this ghost realm. Quickly tell us who you are, or you will be turned into ashes." Chuckling, Wuxia suddenly retreated dozens of miles and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, but I really don't know how I got here." "Well, the green dragon boat you mentioned? I saw it from a distance of thousands of miles a few days ago. But the person on the dragon boat is so fierce, I don't dare to strike up a conversation with him." Pointing in a direction, Wuxia laughed dryly and said, "It's about 7,000 miles this way. If you rush there, you might be able to see that senior in a crimson robe." The two Ghost King's special envoys were obviously at a loss. Wuqi's background was unknown, so they had to capture him and interrogate him. However, they could not let go of the dragon boat that Wuxia had mentioned. Their main duty was to find the dragon boat and capture the man on it before he fully gained his sentience. This was also the main task that Great Yu's Hunda Ghost King had given them hundreds of years ago. The ancient immortal on the dragon boat was very secretive. The two special envoys had worked together to capture him a few times, but he had escaped a few times, which had aroused the dissatisfaction of their master. Therefore, when Wuxia said that the dragon boat had appeared 7,000 miles away, they had to rush there and check it out. But what about Wuxia? The two ghost immortals exchanged a glance and suddenly cried out hoarsely, "We only sensed the aura of the man on the dragon boat 7 days ago, and we can't find him even if we rush there now. You, on the other hand, are sneaky. You'd better let us capture you and bring you back to report." The ghost immortal shook his wrist, and the long iron chain abruptly split into thousands of chains as thick as a human wrist, filling the void with ear-splitting whistling noises. In the next moment, a huge net made of iron chains came looming over Wuxia, emanating a tremendous suction force from the center of the net. The dozens of high-grade heavenly ghosts around him fled into the dark clouds at the same time. Dark shadows flashed around them as they were ready to pounce on Wuxia at any time. Wuxia gave a strange laugh, then with a sway of his body, he teleported thousands of miles away. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.